French paradox. The French paradox is a phenomenon that has puzzled health experts for decades. Despite consuming a diet rich in fats, including butter, cheese, and wine, the French population maintains relatively low rates of heart disease and cardiovascular issues compared to other Western countries. How can this be? It seems counterintuitive. The conventional wisdom tells us that eating a high-fat diet should lead to poor heart health, yet the French continue to indulge in foods that are often labelled as unhealthy in modern dietary guidelines. The French paradox raises the question: is there more to health than just diet alone? Could lifestyle factors, such as portion control, social eating habits, physical activity, or even stress management, contribute to the seemingly contradictory results? Or is there something about the French way of eating, the way meals are prepared, served, and savoured, that makes a difference? The paradox forces us to reconsider the simplistic relationship between dietary fats and health outcomes, and challenges our understanding of how lifestyle factors come together to affect long-term well-being. Let's explore the French paradox, where diet, culture, and health intertwine in a fascinating and counterintuitive way. The term French paradox was popularized in the early 1990s, after a 60-minute segment aired in 1991, where American cardiologists and nutritionists expressed bewilderment at the health statistics of the French. Despite the French diet being rich in saturated fats, they seem to have relatively low rates of heart disease compared to other Western countries, particularly the United States, where high-fat diets were thought to be directly linked to higher instances of cardiovascular problems. Before this, the relationship between dietary fat and cardiovascular disease was already well established in medical research, and the consumption of saturated fats was widely believed to be a major risk factor for heart disease. So the French anomaly caught the attention of both researchers and the media, leading to numerous studies aimed at understanding the difference in heart disease rates between the French and other populations with similar diets. In 1992, researchers first pointed to the protective effects of red wine as a key factor in the paradox, suggesting that moderate wine consumption, particularly red wine, rich in resveratrol and other polyphenols, might have cardiovascular benefits. This theory gained traction, and researchers began to look more closely at not just what the French were eating, but how they were eating and living. The French paradox is now a key point of discussion in debates about dietary guidelines, lifestyle factors, and the role of culture in determining health outcomes. It also serves as a reminder that health is a complex interaction of dietary choices, social habits, and cultural practices that go beyond mere nutrient intake. The French paradox challenges the widely accepted notion that a high-fat diet leads to poor cardiovascular health. For years, experts believed that diets rich in saturated fats, such as the French diet, which includes cheese, butter, and fatty meats, would result in higher rates of heart disease. However, the French population seems to defy these expectations, with a lower rate of heart disease compared to other Western countries. Several factors contribute to this paradox, ranging from the French approach to eating habits and social norms to their broader lifestyle choices. To understand the paradox fully, we need to examine various components of diet, physical activity, and cultural practices. The French diet is often considered fat-rich, with common ingredients like butter, cream, cheese, and fatty meats playing central roles in many traditional dishes. This high consumption of saturated fats runs counter to the recommendations of many health authorities, which advise reducing saturated fat intake to lower the risk of heart disease. However, the French seem to experience a relatively low incidence of heart disease compared to other populations with similar dietary habits, particularly in the United States, where a similar high-fat diet leads to higher rates of cardiovascular problems. One possible explanation for the French paradox is the quality of fats consumed. Unlike many other Western countries, the French primarily consume fats from natural sources, such as grass-fed butter, cheese, and olive oil, rather than processed fats found in fast food and packaged goods. These fats contain omega-3 fatty acids, which have been shown to have beneficial effects on heart health, as well as other nutrients like vitamins A and K2, which are important for overall health. In addition to high-fat foods, the French are also known for their moderate consumption of red wine. This has been a key part of the French paradox since the 1990s, with many experts suggesting that red wine may offer cardiovascular protection due to its content of polyphenols, especially resveratrol. These compounds are believed to have antioxidant properties, that may help reduce inflammation and protect blood vessels from damage, reducing the risk of arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, and blood clot formation. The moderate consumption of red wine in France is often considered a factor that balances the negative effects of the high-fat diet. Studies have suggested that the antioxidants in red wine can increase HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol, and decrease LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, promoting vascular health. While it is important to note that excessive alcohol consumption can lead to health risks, the French paradox suggests that moderate drinking of red wine may have protective effects on heart health and may explain the relatively low rates of heart disease in France. One of the key components of the French paradox is the way the French approach meals. Unlike many other countries where fast food and snacking are common, French meals tend to be deliberate, slow-paced, and centered around social interaction. Meals are often enjoyed with family and friends, taking time to savor the food and drink, rather than rushed or consumed on the go. This slower, more mindful approach to eating may have several health benefits. First, the act of eating slowly gives the body time to signal when it is full, reducing the likelihood of overeating. Studies have shown that people who eat more slowly are more likely to feel satisfied with smaller portions, which helps maintain healthy body weight and prevent obesity, a major risk factor for heart disease. Additionally, the social aspect of eating in France encourages portion control. Because meals are shared and savoured in the company of others, it is less common to overeat in a way that leads to weight gain and metabolic issues. This is in stark contrast to the individualistic and often rushed eating habits found in other cultures, where people may eat in isolation or while multitasking, leading to overeating or poor dietary choices. In addition to eating habits, the French tend to have a more active lifestyle compared to other Western populations. Walking, cycling, and public transportation are common aspects of daily life in France, particularly in urban areas like Paris. The French do not typically rely on cars for short trips, which encourages walking and staying active throughout the day. This active lifestyle plays a key role in maintaining cardiovascular health and managing body weight, both of which are protective factors against heart disease. Unlike countries where sedentary behavior and car culture are more prevalent, the French lifestyle encourages regular movement as part of everyday activities. Moreover, the French place a strong emphasis on moderation in all aspects of life, including physical activity. While many Americans may engage in intense exercise in the hopes of achieving rapid fitness results, the French often adopt a more balanced approach to exercise, focusing on low-impact activities like walking or biking, which can promote longevity without causing stress or strain on the body. Stress management is another factor that plays into the French paradox. Unlike some countries where the pace of life is fast and people experience high levels of work stress, the French tend to place a higher value on work-life balance. The concept of leisure time, or le temps libre, is deeply embedded in French culture. It is common for individuals to take long lunch breaks, spend time with family, and enjoy recreational activities after work, all of which contribute to stress relief and mental well-being. In addition, the French culture emphasizes the importance of enjoying food and wine in moderation, which can have a relaxing effect and contribute to mental health. The practice of mindful eating, coupled with a social atmosphere, creates a more relaxed approach to food that contrasts with the stressful eating habits found in more fast-paced environments. Interestingly, while the French enjoy high-fat foods, they also tend to engage in moderate exercise as part of their daily routines. The exercise paradox in the context of French culture may help explain the paradox itself. The French do not engage in intense workouts or extreme diets, but instead focus on a balanced approach that includes moderate eating, physical activity, and mindful living. This balanced approach seems to counteract the potential negative effects of a high-fat diet, leading to better overall health outcomes. The French paradox has profound implications for dietary guidelines, health policies, and cultural approaches to wellness. While low-fat diets and exercise regimens have long been promoted as the keys to good health, the French model suggests that a more holistic approach to health, which includes moderation, social eating, and a balance of physical activity, may be just as effective. In the context of global health trends, the French paradox encourages us to consider not just what we eat, but how we eat and live, and how cultural norms can influence our health. It suggests that moderation and enjoyment are key components of a healthy lifestyle, and that strict dietary restrictions may not be necessary for achieving optimal health. The glucose paradox. Imagine your body's primary source of energy, glucose, which is essential for cellular functions, brain activity, and muscle movements. Now, consider this. Glucose, while vital for survival, is often linked to metabolic disorders like obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases. The glucose paradox presents a fascinating contradiction. Glucose, a seemingly simple and essential sugar, is both a necessary fuel and a potential health risk. How can something that powers your body's cells also be harmful when consumed in excess? The paradox lies in the fact that glucose is metabolized in different ways depending on the quantity, timing, and context of its consumption. Too little glucose and your body struggles to perform basic functions. Too much, and it can lead to insulin resistance, fatty liver disease, and even chronic inflammation. So, why does glucose, which is so critical for life, have such a double-edged sword effect on human health? The glucose paradox forces us to question how we manage glucose in our diets and how our bodies balance its use. Let's explore the glucose paradox, where nutrition, metabolism, and health intersect in a complex dance of balance and risk. The concept of the glucose paradox is rooted in the growing understanding of human metabolism and the role of glucose in both health and disease. For centuries, glucose has been recognized as a vital energy source for the body. It is the main fuel for cells, especially in high-demand areas like the brain and muscles. Early research into metabolism focused on the ways the body processes glucose to generate energy. In the 20th century, scientists discovered that glucose is regulated by insulin, a hormone produced by the pancreas which helps the body store and utilize glucose. However, as the global rates of obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases surged, researchers began to realize that excessive glucose consumption, especially in the form of sugary foods and refined carbohydrates, had negative effects on the body's metabolic health. These findings led to the concept of the glucose paradox, the idea that glucose is both necessary and potentially harmful to human health, depending on how it is processed, stored, and utilized. In recent years, scientists have further explored how chronic high glucose levels, due to poor diet or insulin resistance, contribute to long-term health issues, while also recognizing that moderate glucose consumption is crucial for proper bodily function. This paradox has become a focal point in nutritional science, endocrinology, and public health as we seek to understand how to optimize glucose metabolism for better health outcomes. The glucose paradox is a concept that highlights the duality of glucose in human health. Glucose is an essential energy source for the body, particularly the brain and muscles, but when consumed in excess, it can contribute to a variety of metabolic disorders. The paradox lies in the fact that glucose can be both beneficial and harmful, depending on how much we consume and how efficiently our bodies can regulate it. This paradox is particularly relevant in modern diets, where refined sugars and processed carbohydrates are abundant, leading to concerns about chronic disease and insulin resistance. Glucose is the most immediate source of energy for the body. It is essential for the functioning of cells, particularly in high-energy demand organs such as the brain, muscles, and red blood cells. The process of glycolysis breaks down glucose into pyruvate, which is then used to generate ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the energy currency of the cell. When we consume carbohydrates in food, they are broken down into glucose and absorbed into the bloodstream, raising blood sugar levels. The body's natural response is to release insulin, a hormone that helps transport glucose into cells for energy production. In the short term, glucose is a vital and efficient fuel for the body's functions. The body maintains a delicate balance of glucose in the blood, referred to as glucose homeostasis. This balance is largely controlled by the interaction of insulin and another hormone, glucagon. Insulin helps cells take in glucose for immediate energy or storage, as glycogen in muscles and the liver. On the other hand, glucagon raises blood glucose levels by stimulating the liver to release stored glycogen. In healthy individuals, this system ensures that blood glucose levels stay within a normal range, allowing for both immediate energy use and long-term storage. However, problems arise when this regulatory system becomes dysregulated due to factors such as poor diet, lack of exercise, and genetic predisposition. The key to the glucose paradox is the overconsumption of glucose. When we regularly consume foods high in sugar and refined carbohydrates, our bodies are constantly forced to process large amounts of glucose. Over time, this can lead to insulin resistance, a condition where insulin becomes less effective at helping cells absorb glucose. Insulin resistance occurs when the body's cells stop responding to insulin effectively, causing higher blood sugar levels. To compensate, the pancreas produces more insulin, leading to hyperinsulinemia, excessive insulin in the blood. This condition is often a precursor to type 2 diabetes, a chronic disease that impairs the body's ability to regulate blood sugar effectively. As insulin resistance progresses, it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain healthy glucose levels, leading to a variety of metabolic issues. When the body is constantly exposed to high levels of glucose and insulin, the excess glucose that is not used for immediate energy gets stored as fat, particularly in the liver and abdomen. Visceral fat, fat stored around organs, has been linked to a higher risk of heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. Additionally, excess glucose can lead to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD, a condition where fat accumulates in the liver, impairing its function. Fatty liver disease can progress to cirrhosis and liver failure, making it a significant health concern for individuals with chronic high glucose levels. The paradox is clear. The body's attempt to store excess glucose for future energy use can ultimately result in fat accumulation and serious metabolic health issues. Another consequence of excess glucose is the promotion of chronic inflammation. High glucose levels have been shown to increase the production of reactive oxygen species, AOS, and advanced glycation end products, AGs, both of which contribute to inflammation and damage to blood vessels. Chronic inflammation is a key factor in the development of atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, high blood pressure, and cardiovascular disease. The glucose paradox emerges because while glucose is essential for energy, its overconsumption can lead to insulin resistance, fat storage, and inflammation, ultimately increasing the risk of heart disease and other chronic health conditions. The brain relies almost entirely on glucose as its primary fuel source. The glucose paradox also extends to cognitive function, as the brain needs a constant supply of glucose to perform well. However, high levels of blood sugar over time can impair cognitive function and contribute to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Excessive glucose leads to the formation of toxic molecules that can damage brain cells and reduce their ability to function properly. Chronic high glucose levels have been linked to cognitive decline, memory impairment, and mood disorders. Thus, the very substance the brain relies on for energy can become harmful when consumed in excess. The glucose paradox also applies to hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, which can occur when insulin levels drop too low after a high-carb meal or insulin injection. Hypoglycemia can cause symptoms like fatigue, irritability, and difficulty concentrating, and may lead to a sugar crash that impairs overall well-being. In this context, glucose, while essential for cognitive function, can create an unstable energy system if its regulation is not managed properly. The glucose paradox can be managed by maintaining a balanced diet that avoids excessive glucose consumption while still providing enough to meet the body's needs. Whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and lean proteins offer a more stable source of glucose, as they are digested more slowly and have a lower glycemic index, preventing spikes in blood sugar. Moderating the intake of refined sugars and processed carbohydrates, such as white bread, pastries, and sugary drinks, is key to preventing the negative effects of excess glucose. The focus should be on balanced meals, portion control, and sustainable energy sources. Exercise is one of the most effective ways to improve insulin sensitivity and manage blood glucose levels. Regular physical activity helps the muscles take in glucose directly from the bloodstream, reducing reliance on insulin. Aerobic exercises and strength training improve metabolic health and can help prevent the onset of type 2 diabetes. Adequate sleep and stress management are essential for maintaining healthy glucose levels. Practicing stress reduction techniques like meditation, yoga, or mindful breathing can help improve glucose regulation and reduce the risk of metabolic disorders. The glucose paradox forces us to recognize the delicate balance that must be struck between maintaining a sufficient supply of glucose for energy and avoiding excessive intake that leads to health problems. While glucose is essential for life, the body's ability to regulate it is key to its positive effects on health. The paradox challenges us to rethink our approach to dietary guidelines and health policies, emphasizing the need for moderation and balance in glucose consumption. By recognizing that too much of a good thing can be harmful, we can adopt strategies for optimal glucose management and improve long-term health. Hispanic paradox. In many countries, socioeconomic status, education, and access to healthcare are key predictors of life expectancy and health outcomes. In theory, individuals from lower socioeconomic backgrounds should experience worse health and a shorter life expectancy. Yet, in the case of the Hispanic paradox, the opposite is often true. Despite higher rates of poverty, lower education levels, and limited access to healthcare in some Hispanic populations, particularly among immigrants to the United States, these groups consistently experience better health outcomes and longer life expectancy compared to other populations with similar or better socioeconomic profiles. How can this be? How is it that individuals in these groups, often facing economic disadvantage and healthcare barriers, live longer and remain healthier than expected? The Hispanic paradox calls attention to the complex intersection of health, culture, community, and lifestyle factors, challenging conventional wisdom about how socioeconomic conditions influence well-being. Let's explore the Hispanic paradox, where longevity and health defy the typical expectations based on socioeconomic status, offering a fascinating look at the interplay between culture, lifestyle, and health outcomes. The Hispanic paradox first gained attention in the early 1980s, when researchers began noticing that Hispanic populations in the United States, despite experiencing disadvantageous socioeconomic conditions, often had longer life expectancies and better overall health outcomes than would be expected based on their socioeconomic status. This paradox was particularly evident when comparing Hispanic individuals to their non-Hispanic white counterparts, who, in many cases, had higher incomes, better education, and better access to healthcare. Early studies found that Hispanics, especially those of Mexican and Puerto Rican descent, had lower mortality rates from conditions like heart disease and cancer, despite having higher rates of poverty, lower health insurance coverage, and higher incidences of obesity. In fact, some studies suggested that Hispanic immigrants to the US had better health than native-born Americans, even though they faced greater challenges related to language barriers, immigration status, and lack of healthcare access. Several explanations have been proposed to account for this paradox, ranging from cultural and dietary factors to social networks and the healthy migrant effect. However, the paradox has sparked debates in the fields of public health, sociology, and epidemiology, as researchers continue to explore why the health advantage of Hispanic populations persists in the face of numerous socioeconomic disadvantages. The Hispanic paradox has since become a central topic in understanding health disparities and the complex relationship between socioeconomic status, health outcomes, and cultural factors. The Hispanic paradox is a compelling phenomenon that challenges the typical understanding of how socioeconomic factors influence health outcomes. On the surface, it seems counterintuitive. Individuals from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, particularly immigrants from Latin America, are expected to have worse health and shorter life expectancies due to poverty, lack of access to healthcare, and poor living conditions. However, data consistently show that these individuals tend to live longer, healthier lives, often outperforming other racial and ethnic groups in the United States when it comes to chronic diseases, heart disease, and life expectancy. The Hispanic paradox invites a deeper examination of the various factors that contribute to this unexpected health advantage. One key explanation for the Hispanic paradox is the concept of the healthy migrant effect. This hypothesis suggests that people who migrate to a new country, particularly those who immigrate for economic opportunity or to escape political instability, tend to be healthier than their peers who remain in their home country. The selection process for migration often favors those who are in good health and capable of enduring the stresses of the immigration process. Many studies have shown that immigrants tend to have better health outcomes than their native-born counterparts, especially when it comes to heart disease and life expectancy. This effect may also explain the longer life expectancy observed in certain Hispanic populations who have immigrated to the US. In particular, immigrants from Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Central America often exhibit lower rates of chronic diseases, despite their socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds. However, the healthy migrant effect may diminish over time, as immigrants who spend more years in their new country may adopt unhealthy behaviors and lifestyle changes associated with their new environment. This is seen in second-generation immigrants, who may experience higher rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease compared to first-generation immigrants. The healthy migrant effect may also be linked to the cultural aspects of life in the home country. Many Latin American cultures place a strong emphasis on family and community, which can offer psychological and emotional benefits that contribute to health. Strong family ties and social support networks are associated with better mental health and can act as a buffer against the stress of immigration and life in a new country. In addition, Hispanic communities often have culturally ingrained practices, such as dietary habits, like consuming fresh fruits, vegetables, and legumes, that may contribute to their overall better health outcomes. Although dietary patterns may shift over time, the early years of life for immigrants are often characterized by a diet and lifestyle that supports healthier outcomes compared to the traditional American diet. The Hispanic paradox is also influenced by the strong family structures and community networks prevalent in many Hispanic and Latino populations. These social structures have been shown to be protective against poor health outcomes. Strong family and community ties offer emotional support, which helps individuals cope with stress and mental health challenges, both of which are important for overall well-being. The close connect nature of Hispanic families can create a strong social support system, where family members take care of each other, particularly elderly relatives, and share resources. This system reduces the impact of social isolation, which is a major risk factor for conditions like depression, cardiovascular disease, and early mortality. Additionally, community involvement in Hispanic populations can foster a sense of belonging and purpose, which are important factors in maintaining mental health. Participation in religious practices, community events, and social gatherings creates an environment of support that enhances health outcomes by reducing psychosocial stress. Although poverty is often associated with negative health outcomes, the Hispanic paradox suggests that the effects of poverty may not be as pronounced in these populations. While it is true that many Hispanic individuals in the US live in lower-income households, their relatively lower rates of chronic disease and higher life expectancy suggest that other factors, such as social support and cultural practices, may counterbalance the negative effects of poverty. Studies have shown that Hispanic communities are more likely to have strong social safety nets, including access to extended family care and informal support systems, which can mitigate some of the negative impacts of poverty. These communities often focus on shared resources, where families and neighbours help each other with childcare, financial support, and emotional care, leading to better health outcomes. One factor that contributes to the Hispanic paradox is the way Hispanic populations cope with the stress associated with immigration, poverty, and discrimination. In many cases, Hispanic communities rely on strong social networks, religious faith, and cultural values to cope with these stresses. This ability to cope effectively with stress may protect against the negative health effects of chronic stress, such as cardiovascular disease, mental health disorders, and poor immune function. The cultural practice of celebrating life and maintaining a positive attitude despite hardship may help buffer the psychological effects of stress and improve overall resilience to physical illness. The traditional Hispanic diet, which includes fresh vegetables, legumes, lean meats, and corn-based foods, like tortillas, has been associated with better heart health and longevity. Despite higher consumption of rice, beans, and vegetables, traditional Hispanic diets tend to be lower in processed foods, sugars, and refined grains compared to the typical American diet. This dietary pattern is rich in fiber, antioxidants, and healthy fats, all of which contribute to better metabolic health and a reduced risk of chronic disease. As immigrants adapt to the lifestyle of their new country, they may begin to consume more fast food and high-calorie processed foods, leading to an increase in the prevalence of obesity and diabetes over time. However, the early years of life in a Hispanic immigrant population may still be characterized by a more traditional, healthful diet, which likely contributes to the paradox of better health outcomes despite lower socioeconomic status. In many Hispanic cultures, there is an emphasis on physical activity through activities such as dancing, walking, and family outings. While not necessarily structured exercise, these activities help maintain fitness and reduce the risk of heart disease and obesity. Walking as a mode of transportation, particularly in urban areas with limited car access, can also contribute to better overall physical activity levels, which support good cardiovascular health. While first-generation Hispanic immigrants tend to experience better health outcomes compared to native-born Americans, the Hispanic paradox begins to diminish in subsequent generations. As individuals become more acculturated to American society, they tend to adopt American lifestyle habits, such as increased caloric intake, sedentary behavior, and a greater reliance on processed foods. This acculturation effect contributes to higher rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease in the second and third generations of Hispanic immigrants. The preservation of cultural identity and traditions may help mitigate some of the health risks associated with acculturation. Communities that maintain strong ties to their cultural practices may have protective factors that help them retain aspects of the traditional lifestyle that contribute to their health advantage. Israeli paradox. Imagine a country surrounded by conflict, with security threats looming at every border, yet it continues to thrive as a global leader in innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. This is the Israeli paradox, a phenomenon where a nation facing extreme political instability and security challenges manages to be one of the world's most innovative economies. Despite being at the center of ongoing regional conflicts and surrounded by political and military threats, Israel continues to rank highly in areas such as startups, research and development, and technological advancements. How can a nation seemingly burdened by constant security concerns foster such a thriving economy? The paradox lies in the balance between the necessity for defense and security and the need for economic growth and technological progress. Israel's commitment to national security often leads to military-driven innovation, which, in turn, drives its economic success. The question is, how does a country that constantly faces existential threats turn these pressures into opportunities for growth? The Israeli paradox forces us to rethink how innovation and security interact and how adversity can sometimes catalyze progress. Let's explore this fascinating paradox where conflict, creativity, and economic prosperity collide. The Israeli paradox emerged in the context of Israel's unique geopolitical situation. Since its founding in 1948, Israel has faced constant conflict with neighboring Arab states, as well as ongoing political tensions with the Palestinian territories. These threats have forced Israel to prioritize national security above all else, resulting in a military-driven economy that emphasizes defense, innovation, and technological advancement. In the early years, Israel's economic foundation was built largely on military spending and technological research for defense purposes. Over time, this emphasis on defense technology laid the groundwork for Israel's thriving high-tech sector. Cybersecurity, defense technology, aerospace, and medical innovations became key areas of expertise, making Israel one of the world's leaders in these fields. The country's startup culture also flourished, thanks in part to military service, where many young Israelis gain experience in fields like engineering, technology, and intelligence. By the 1990s, Israel had transitioned from being primarily a military-industrial complex to a global tech hub, thanks to its robust research and development (R&D) sector, world-class universities, and a culture of entrepreneurship. Tel Aviv in particular became one of the leading cities for startups, earning the nickname Silicon Wadia, nod to the tech hub of Silicon Valley in the United States. Today, Israel is home to one of the highest concentrations of startups and venture capital funding per capita in the world. Despite these successes, Israel continues to face security challenges, which, paradoxically, have contributed to its economic growth in many ways, turning its military vulnerabilities into opportunities for technological leadership. The Israeli paradox challenges conventional wisdom about economic growth, national security, and technological innovation. The paradox lies in the interplay between security concerns and economic development. While most countries would prioritize economic stability and trade relations for growth, Israel's focus on security has directly contributed to its success in the high-tech industry and entrepreneurial ventures. Here are the key factors that contribute to this paradox. Military innovation as a driver of economic growth. Military R&D and defense innovation. Israel's national security concerns have played a critical role in shaping the country's innovation landscape. From its early days, Israel prioritized military technology as a way to counter its relatively small population and lack of natural resources. The country became a global leader in developing advanced defense technologies, particularly in areas like cybersecurity, drone technology, and anti-missile systems, e.g. the Iron Dome. These technologies were initially developed for national defense, but later found commercial applications. The military-industrial complex in Israel helped to create a culture of engineering excellence and cutting-edge technology, which formed the foundation for its thriving civilian tech industry. The government's emphasis on military research led to innovations that had far-reaching effects on both defense and civilian sectors. For example, Israel's military innovations in cybersecurity have been transferred to the private sector, enabling Israel to become one of the leading countries in cyber defense. Military service as a path to innovation. In Israel, military service is compulsory for most citizens, and this has had a profound impact on the country's innovation ecosystem. Many young Israelis are trained in intelligence, engineering, and technology fields during their service. For example, elite military units like Unit 8200, an Israeli intelligence unit focused on cyber operations and information technology, provide training in skills that are directly applicable to high-tech industries. After completing their military service, many veterans go on to become entrepreneurs, starting their own companies or working for established startups in the tech sector. This creates a pipeline of highly skilled individuals who possess both the technical expertise and the problem-solving skills developed through their military experiences. The result is a cultural synergy between military innovation and entrepreneurial spirit, contributing to Israel's status as a global tech hub. The role of Israel's education system. World-class universities and research. Israel boasts a strong education system, with some of the world's top universities and research institutions, such as the Technion, Israel Institute of Technology, and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. These institutions are not only centers of academic excellence, but also hubs for research and development, R&D, in science, engineering, medicine, and technology. Israel invests heavily in R&D, often spending a higher percentage of its GDP on research than many other countries. This emphasis on scientific discovery and technological advancement fosters an environment where innovation is prioritized and supported by the government, private sector, and academia. Collaboration between academia and industry. One of the unique features of the Israeli innovation ecosystem is the close collaboration between universities and industry. Startups often emerge directly from university research, and many Israeli researchers have successfully commercialized their findings by founding tech companies or collaborating with private sector investors. This symbiotic relationship between academia and industry has enabled Israel to rapidly translate cutting-edge research into real-world applications, particularly in the fields of cybersecurity, biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and agriculture, entrepreneurial culture, and government support. Israel's startup ecosystem. Israel has become a global leader in startups, with Tel Aviv earning the title of the world's second-largest startup city after Silicon Valley. The entrepreneurial spirit in Israel is fueled by a combination of risk-taking, innovation, and a fail-fast mentality. Failure is not seen as a setback, but as part of the process toward eventual success. This culture encourages young people to take calculated risks and start their own ventures. The Israeli government plays a significant role in fostering this entrepreneurial environment. Government-backed initiatives like the Chief Scientist's Office and the Israel Innovation Authority provide funding and support to startups, especially in the early stages. Israel also benefits from a large pool of venture capitalists who are willing to invest in high-risk, high-reward technologies. The result is a thriving ecosystem of innovative companies that drive Israel's economic growth. Immigration and the brain drain. Israel has successfully attracted highly skilled individuals from all over the world, many of whom contribute to the startup ecosystem. The influx of immigrants, many of whom come from Russia, Ethiopia, and other countries, has brought new ideas and talent to Israel's growing tech industry. This has allowed Israel to maintain a constant influx of innovation and entrepreneurial energy, ensuring that it remains competitive on the global stage. Interestingly, Israel has also been able to attract some of the brightest minds from diaspora communities, particularly the Jewish diaspora, who bring their expertise to Israel's technology sector. This brain gain contrasts with the common phenomenon of brain drain seen in many developing countries, where the most educated individuals leave for better opportunities abroad. Security, political instability, and innovation. The role of security in innovation. Israel's need for security in the face of constant threats has, ironically, played a central role in its technological achievements. Defense spending is a significant part of the Israeli economy, and much of the country's technological expertise was originally developed for military applications. Over time, Israel's military innovations have been adapted for use in the private sector, creating synergies between defense technology and civilian applications. For example, technologies developed for military use, such as drone technology, cybersecurity systems, and advanced surveillance techniques, have found commercial applications in industries ranging from agriculture to finance to healthcare. This military-civilian collaboration has become a cornerstone of Israel's high-tech economy. Political instability as a catalyst for creativity. Despite the constant threat of conflict and terrorism, the political instability in Israel has created a sense of urgency that drives creativity and innovation. In a country where security is a primary concern, there is a culture of constantly seeking solutions to problems, whether they are related to defense or technology. This sense of necessity has fueled technological breakthroughs, particularly in fields such as cybersecurity, communications, and data analysis. Interestingly, Israel's security situation has become a competitive advantage in the global economy. The country's ability to develop advanced technologies to address national security challenges has allowed Israel to sell its expertise to countries and corporations around the world, particularly in the fields of cybersecurity, military intelligence, and defense systems. Implications for global innovation and economic growth, rethinking the role of conflict in innovation. The Israeli paradox challenges the conventional notion that conflict and political instability are always detrimental to economic and technological development. Israel's high-tech economy has flourished despite, or perhaps because of, its security challenges. The paradox forces us to reconsider how external pressures can sometimes lead to creative solutions and technological advancement. Lessons for other nations. The Israeli paradox offers valuable lessons for other nations seeking to foster innovation and entrepreneurship. By investing in education, research and development, and entrepreneurial ecosystems, countries can create environments where creativity and technology thrive, even in the face of challenges. Furthermore, the synergy between defense and commercial applications in Israel highlights the potential for military technology to drive economic growth, even in countries facing geopolitical instability. Mexican paradox. Imagine a country where highly caloric foods, including fried tortillas, refried beans, and sugary beverages, are staples in the national diet. In many parts of the world, this type of diet would be associated with obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Yet, despite the prevalence of these risk factors in Mexico, the country exhibits a surprising paradox. It has a higher life expectancy than expected for its socio-economic profile and the dietary habits of its population. This phenomenon is called the Mexican paradox, where, despite an apparent unhealthy diet, high rates of obesity, and economic challenges, the Mexican population has a relatively long life expectancy and better health outcomes compared to countries with similar or better socio-economic conditions. How can this be? How do the Mexican people seem to thrive despite the risk factors associated with their traditional diet and lifestyle? The Mexican paradox forces us to rethink our understanding of nutrition, health, and longevity. Is there more to health than just diet, or are there other cultural, genetic, or social factors at play that contribute to the resilience of the Mexican population? Let's explore this fascinating paradox where diet, lifestyle, and health outcomes defy conventional expectations. The Mexican paradox began to gain attention in the early 2000s when researchers studying the relationship between dietary patterns, socio-economic status, and life expectancy in different countries noticed that Mexico, despite having high rates of obesity, sugary drink consumption, and low-income populations, experienced surprisingly good health outcomes. This contradiction stood in stark contrast to many other countries, particularly those in the developed world, where diets high in fatty foods, sugar, and processed foods were directly linked to chronic disease and shortened life expectancy. Mexico has one of the highest per capita consumption rates of sugary beverages and high-fat foods, yet, paradoxically, it also has a relatively high life expectancy compared to other countries with similar levels of poverty or food insecurity. Despite Mexico's health challenges, such as high obesity rates, rising diabetes prevalence, and poor access to healthcare in rural areas, studies have shown that life expectancy in Mexico exceeds what would be expected based on the country's economic and dietary profile. This paradox became more prominent in discussions about public health, nutrition, and lifestyle factors, leading experts to explore what additional factors could be contributing to the resilience of the Mexican population in the face of an otherwise unhealthy diet. The Mexican paradox challenges traditional assumptions about the relationship between dietary habits, socioeconomic status, and health outcomes. Despite Mexico's high rates of obesity, diabetes, and unhealthy food consumption, its population exhibits surprisingly good health outcomes, including a longer life expectancy compared to other countries with similar levels of poverty or dietary risk factors. The paradox invites a closer examination of several factors, including culture, community, genetics, and lifestyle, which may explain why Mexicans tend to live longer despite facing numerous health challenges. The role of diet in Mexico's paradox. Traditional Mexican diet versus modern Western diet. The Mexican diet is often considered high in caloric density, with many meals featuring fried foods, corn tortillas, beans, cheese, and sugary beverages. Soda consumption in Mexico has reached epidemic levels, contributing to the country's high rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes. Despite these dietary trends, the Mexican paradox suggests that there are protective factors in the diet that may contribute to longer life expectancy. The traditional Mexican diet includes a significant amount of plant-based foods, such as corn, beans, squash, and chiles, which are rich in fiber, antioxidants, and vitamins. The fiber in beans and corn helps regulate blood sugar levels, while the high levels of capsaicin, found in chili peppers, may have anti-inflammatory and metabolic benefits. These foods, when eaten as part of a balanced diet, can reduce the negative impact of more caloric-rich foods. While the modern Mexican diet has become increasingly westernized, with higher consumption of fast food and sugary drinks, the traditional aspects of the diet may still provide some protection. Additionally, portion control and eating patterns, which emphasize shared meals and slower eating, may also mitigate the health risks associated with overeating. The role of sugary drinks and high-calorie foods. Mexico is the world's largest consumer of sugary beverages, with soda being a staple of the Mexican diet. The paradox arises because excessive sugar consumption is a known risk factor for obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Yet, despite this, many studies indicate that Mexicans, on average, live longer than would be expected based on their high levels of sugar consumption. One explanation for this paradox may lie in the frequency of consumption and the portion sizes. In contrast to the American diet, where sugary drinks are consumed frequently and in large quantities, Mexicans tend to consume sugary beverages in moderate portions and alongside meals rather than as a standalone snack. This may help moderate the impact of sugar on blood glucose levels and insulin sensitivity. Social and cultural eating habits. The way food is prepared, served, and eaten in Mexico also plays a role in the Mexican paradox. Meals are typically shared with family and friends, fostering a sense of community and social connection. This communal eating culture may contribute to slower eating, better digestion, and healthier portion sizes. Unlike in countries where individuals may eat quickly and alone, the social aspect of dining in Mexico encourages mindful eating, which has been shown to reduce overeating and overconsumption of unhealthy foods. In addition, family-oriented cultures are known to provide strong social support systems, which have positive effects on mental health and longevity. The emotional and psychological benefits of these close-knit social networks are associated with lower stress levels, better mental health, and improved immune function, all of which contribute to longer life expectancy. Genetics and the Mexican paradox. Genetic resilience. Another factor contributing to the Mexican paradox is the possibility of genetic resilience. Studies suggest that certain populations may have genetic adaptations that provide protection against the health risks associated with high-calorie diets or high sugar intake. Some Mexican populations may have developed genetic traits that make them less susceptible to the negative effects of insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. Furthermore, some researchers believe that Mexican populations may have a genetic predisposition for better fat metabolism, which could help mitigate the effects of a high-fat diet. While genetic factors alone cannot explain the Mexican paradox, they may play a role in the population's ability to cope with the health risks associated with their diet. Evolutionary adaptation. It is also possible that certain evolutionary adaptations have contributed to the ability of Mexican populations to survive and thrive in environments with limited resources and economic challenges. These adaptations may include efficient energy storage, improved immune function, or a better ability to process sugars in the diet. Understanding the genetic makeup of specific populations within Mexico may help explain the longevity and resilience seen in the country despite dietary challenges. The role of physical activity and lifestyle. Daily activity levels. Despite high rates of obesity, physical inactivity is not as prevalent in Mexico as in other countries with similar levels of economic disadvantage. Many Mexicans engage in physical activity as part of their daily routines. For instance, walking and bicycling are common modes of transportation, especially in urban areas where public transportation is less accessible. Even in rural areas, daily tasks such as farming, gardening, and manual labor provide a moderate level of physical exercise that helps to combat the negative effects of an otherwise sedentary lifestyle. These activities contribute to overall health by promoting cardiovascular health, maintaining muscle mass, and reducing the risk of chronic diseases. Stress management and mental health. Cultural factors in Mexico also contribute to mental resilience and stress management, which in turn affect overall health. As previously mentioned, close family bonds, social support, and community engagement help to reduce the impact of stress on physical health. In addition, Mexicans are often raised with a deep sense of family and community values, which provide psychological stability during times of adversity. The acculturation effect and long-term health implications. Changes in health with acculturation. While the Mexican paradox may be evident in first-generation immigrants, the paradox tends to diminish in second- and third-generation populations. Acculturation, or the adoption of the host country's lifestyle and dietary habits, leads to an increase in the consumption of processed foods, fast foods, and sugary drinks, which are associated with obesity and chronic diseases. As subsequent generations of Mexican immigrants assimilate into Western culture, they tend to experience higher rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease, much like the broader population. The paradox seems to be most prominent in the first generation of immigrants, who maintain more of their traditional dietary habits and physical activity levels. Conclusion. Understanding the Mexican paradox. A multifactorial explanation. The Mexican paradox is a multifactorial phenomenon that highlights the complex interactions between diet, genetics, lifestyle, and cultural factors. While the Mexican diet may be high in sugar, fat, and calories, the cultural practices of social eating, moderation, and community support help mitigate some of the negative health effects. In addition, physical activity and mental resilience play a significant role in the paradox, contributing to longer life expectancy despite the challenges posed by diet and socioeconomic factors. The Mexican paradox encourages us to rethink the simplistic relationship between dietary habits and health outcomes, reminding us that lifestyle factors such as social connections, community support, and mental well-being also play a vital role in overall health and longevity. Obesity paradox. It's widely accepted that obesity is a significant risk factor for a variety of chronic diseases, including heart disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. The general belief is that the heavier we are, the more likely we are to experience health complications and even early death. But what if I told you that, in some cases, obesity seems to be linked to better survival rates in individuals with heart disease, stroke, and even certain cancer? This is the core of the obesity paradox. A puzzling phenomenon where overweight or obese individuals appear to have better health outcomes and longer life expectancy than those of normal weight, particularly in those already suffering from chronic diseases. How can extra weight, which is generally considered a major health risk, actually be protective in certain populations? The obesity paradox challenges our conventional wisdom about the relationship between body weight and health, forcing us to ask, are all forms of obesity equally harmful? Or are there situations where being overweight could have potential protective effects? Let's explore the obesity paradox, where the link between body weight and health outcomes is more complex than we might have imagined. The concept of the obesity paradox began to gain attention in the late 20th century, as researchers observed that overweight individuals, especially those with chronic diseases, often had better survival rates than those with normal weight. This phenomenon was particularly evident in patients with heart disease, stroke, cancer, and chronic kidney disease, where overweight individuals tended to live longer or experience fewer complications compared to their leaner counterparts. Initially, medical science had emphasized the negative effects of obesity, primarily focusing on its role in increasing the risk of diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and hypertension. However, the obesity paradox defied this straightforward link, suggesting that obesity might have unexpected benefits in some contexts, particularly for those who already had pre-existing health conditions. One of the key studies that highlighted the obesity paradox came from research on cardiovascular disease in the early 2000s, where it was discovered that overweight patients with heart disease had a lower risk of death than those who were underweight or had a normal body mass index, BMI. This unexpected finding led researchers to question the traditional view that obesity is uniformly harmful and prompted further investigations into how obesity might interact with disease and mortality in ways that are not fully understood. The obesity paradox continues to challenge our understanding of weight, health, and mortality, and remains an active area of research in the fields of epidemiology, cardiology, and oncology. The obesity paradox is a puzzling phenomenon where overweight or obese individuals appear to have better survival rates and health outcomes than those with normal weight, especially in patients with chronic diseases like heart disease, stroke, and cancer. While obesity is traditionally associated with higher mortality and worse health outcomes, the paradox suggests that the relationship between body weight and health is not as straightforward as it seems. Here we will explore the different explanations for the paradox, including health conditions, fat distribution, muscle mass, and the complexities of disease progression. The role of fat distribution and body composition. Visceral versus subcutaneous fat. One of the most important factors in understanding the obesity paradox is the distinction between visceral fat stored around internal organs, and subcutaneous fat stored just beneath the skin. Visceral fat is associated with a higher risk of chronic diseases, such as heart disease, diabetes, and inflammation, while subcutaneous fat tends to be less harmful. Some studies suggest that individuals who are overweight or obese, but with a higher proportion of subcutaneous fat, may have lower health risks compared to those with visceral fat. In fact, people with a larger waist circumference, which indicates a higher amount of visceral fat, may experience a greater risk of health complications, even if their overall BMI suggests they are overweight. In the context of the obesity paradox, it's possible that individuals with high body fat may have more protective fat distribution in terms of subcutaneous fat, which may buffer the effects of chronic diseases. The paradox suggests that not all obesity is the same, and its effects on health may depend on how the fat is distributed across the body. Muscle mass and fat-free mass. Another important consideration is the role of muscle mass in individuals who are classified as overweight or obese. Research has shown that people with a higher muscle mass often have better insulin sensitivity, improved cardiovascular health, and reduced risks of diabetes and heart disease. Obese individuals with higher muscle mass may be better equipped to handle the metabolic stresses of excess weight and may experience better outcomes in the presence of chronic diseases. In contrast, low muscle mass, a condition known as sarcopenia, has been linked to worse health outcomes and a higher risk of mortality, particularly in older adults. It's possible that the obesity paradox may be related to the muscle mass of overweight individuals. Those with higher muscle mass may experience protective effects against the negative consequences of obesity, especially in the case of chronic diseases like heart disease and cancer. The role of inflammation and immune system function. Chronic inflammation and obesity. Obesity is associated with chronic low-grade inflammation, a state in which the body's immune system is persistently activated, leading to the production of inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein. Chronic inflammation is a risk factor for a variety of diseases, including heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. However, this inflammatory state can also have a protective effect in certain cases. For example, obese individuals with chronic diseases may have a higher level of circulating inflammatory markers that help the body fight infection and disease progression. In some cases, the immune system's response to inflammatory signals may improve survival rates in cancer patients or those with cardiovascular conditions. Obesity might be seen as a buffer against disease progression, particularly in cases where inflammation plays a role in the immune response. Adipokinins and metabolic health. Fat cells, especially visceral fat, produce adipokines, hormones that regulate appetite, energy balance, and immune function. Some adipokinins, such as adiponectin, are anti-inflammatory and help protect against insulin resistance, while others, such as leptin, are involved in appetite regulation. In some obese individuals, higher levels of adiponectin and lower levels of leptin resistance may contribute to better health outcomes, especially in relation to metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes. Thus, the obesity paradox may be partly explained by the hormonal environment within the body, where certain adipokines promote better metabolic health and protect against disease progression. The impact of BMI and mortality risk. The limits of BMI as a health indicator. Body mass index, X as BMI, has long been used as a standard measure to classify individuals as underweight, normal weight, or obese. However, BMI has limitations, as it does not account for fat distribution, muscle mass, or overall body composition. It is possible for someone with high BMI but low body fat, such as an athlete, to be classified as obese despite having excellent health outcome. The obesity paradox underscores the limitations of using BMI as the sole measure of health. Studies have shown that overweight individuals, particularly those with chronic diseases, may have better survival rates compared to those in the normal weight category, due to the potential protective effects of higher body fat, greater energy reserves, and increased muscle mass. This suggests that BMI alone does not provide a complete picture of an individual's health status. Weight fluctuations and mortality. Fluctuations in body weight, especially weight loss in older adults, are associated with increased mortality risk. In contrast, some degree of weight stability, or even small weight gain, may be associated with better survival outcomes, particularly in individuals with heart disease or cancer. The obesity paradox suggests that some weight gain may be protective in the context of chronic disease, as it provides extra energy reserves to help the body cope with illness and treatment. Psychological and social factors in the obesity paradox. Social support and resilience. Psychological and social factors play a critical role in the obesity paradox. Obese individuals who experience social support, particularly from family and community, tend to have better mental health and long-term outcomes than those without a strong social network. Social support can help individuals cope with the psychological stress associated with obesity, such as body image issues and weight stigma. In addition, the resilience that comes from strong family ties and community engagement can improve the ability to manage chronic disease, leading to better survival. This suggests that, in some cases, the psychological benefits of community and social networks may offset the health risks of obesity, contributing to the obesity paradox. The importance of context in the obesity paradox. Disease context and obesity. The obesity paradox is highly contextual. In cases of chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes, obesity may offer protection against the progression of the disease, especially in the early stages. This protection is likely due to extra energy reserves, greater muscle mass, and an improved ability to recover from illness. However, the same obesity that offers protection in one context can be detrimental when it leads to long-term metabolic complications such as diabetes and heart disease. Thus, the obesity paradox does not suggest that obesity is universally beneficial, but that in certain contexts, particularly when combined with chronic disease, overweight individuals may experience better outcomes than expected based on their weight alone. Beto's paradox. Why is it that larger animals, despite having more cells, longer lifespans, and greater metabolic rates, don't seem to get cancer more often than smaller animals? In fact, some of the largest animals on Earth, like whales and elephants, have surprisingly low cancer rates. This is the heart of Beto's paradox, a phenomenon where cancer incidence does not seem to correlate with body size or the number of cells in an organism's body. You would expect that larger animals, which have many more cells that could mutate, would be at a higher risk of cancer. Yet, the opposite is true. Larger animals often have lower cancer rates than smaller ones. This paradox poses a major question. How do these large animals manage to maintain low cancer rates despite their biological makeup seemingly making them more vulnerable to the disease? The Beto's paradox challenges our understanding of cancer biology and points to evolutionary adaptations that help certain species avoid the mutation-driven processes that lead to cancer. The key to this paradox may lie in the way certain animals have evolved protective mechanisms that help them suppress or repair cellular damage, offering a deeper understanding of cancer resistance across species. Let's explore the Beto's paradox, where size, lifespan, and cancer risk collide in a curious and counterintuitive relationship. The term Beto's paradox was first introduced by British epidemiologist Richard Beto in 1977, following his work on the relationship between cancer incidence and body size across different species. Beto noticed that while larger animals generally have more cells and live longer lives, they do not experience a proportional increase in cancer rates when compared to smaller animals. In fact, some of the largest animals on Earth, such as whales, elephants, and even sharks, have surprisingly low rates of cancer relative to their size and lifespan. This paradox challenges the long-standing belief that cancer risk increases with the number of cells or the length of an organism's life expectancy. After all, with more cells and a longer lifespan, the odds of one of those cells mutating and becoming cancerous should logically be higher. Instead, certain species seem to have evolved mechanisms that lower the likelihood of these mutations leading to cancer. Peto's observations became a key area of research in cancer biology and evolutionary medicine. It raised new questions about how evolution shapes the body's ability to prevent cancer, leading to further studies into the genetic factors and protective mechanisms that larger animals may have developed to resist cancer. Peto's work has also spurred new thinking in comparative oncology and has led researchers to look at the genetic adaptations that may underlie cancer resistance in some species. The Peto's paradox presents a fascinating contradiction in the world of cancer research. It highlights the fact that large animals, despite having more cells and longer lifespans, tend to have lower cancer rates compared to what would be expected based on their size and the general understanding of cancer biology. In essence, the paradox is, if larger animals have more cells and a longer lifespan, why don't they get cancer more often? To understand the paradox, we need to dive into the complex interactions between evolution, cellular biology, and the evolutionary mechanisms that may explain how larger animals seem to defy the usual patterns of cancer incidence. The relationship between size and cancer risk. Cancer and the number of cells. Cancer is fundamentally a disease of mutation, where the uncontrolled division of cells leads to the formation of a tumor. Since larger animals have more cells in their bodies, they are theoretically at greater risk of having one or more cells mutate and become cancerous. Based on this logic, we might expect larger animals, with their greater number of cells, to have a higher incidence of cancer compared to smaller animals. This would be especially true since these larger animals live longer, which would give their cells more opportunities to accumulate mutations over time. However, Peto's paradox challenges this assumption. While larger animals do indeed have more cells and live longer, they do not exhibit the expected higher rates of cancer. In fact, large animals, such as elephants, whales, and tortoises, often exhibit surprisingly low rates of cancer relative to their size, life expectancy, and cancer. Another factor at play is life expectancy. Larger animals typically live much longer lives than smaller animals. For instance, blue whales can live over 100 years, and elephants can live up to 70 years. You would expect these animals, with their long lifespans, to experience a greater risk of developing cancer over time due to the sheer number of cell divisions and the increased likelihood of mutations accumulating with age. However, Peto's paradox reveals that these animals have evolved strategies that help to reduce the incidence of cancer despite their long lifespans. Evolutionary adaptations in large animals. Peto's paradox and evolutionary biology. One of the key explanations for Peto's paradox is the idea of evolutionary adaptations that reduce the risk of cancer in large animals. It is hypothesized that larger animals, through millions of years of evolution, have developed mechanisms to suppress or repair DNA mutations more efficiently than smaller animals. In other words, evolution has shaped these species to be less vulnerable to the processes that typically lead to cancer. One well-known example of such an adaptation is the gene TP53, also known as the guardian of the genome. This gene plays a crucial role in protecting the body from cancer by triggering apoptosis, programmed cell death, when a cell becomes damaged or mutated. Many large animals, such as elephants, have multiple copies of this gene, giving them a greater ability to suppress cancerous mutations. Elephants, for example, have 20 copies of TP53, while humans have only one. This increase in the number of tumor-suppressing genes likely helps to prevent cancerous growths from developing, even in animals with more cells and longer lifespans. Tumor suppression and DNA repair mechanisms. Another hypothesis to explain Peto's paradox is the idea that larger animals have evolved more efficient DNA repair mechanisms to counteract the damage that leads to cancer. Larger animals may have more effective ways of identifying and repairing DNA mutations before they become cancerous. It is possible that these animals have developed a higher threshold for dealing with the genetic damage that can lead to cancer. This adaptation would reduce the overall risk of developing tumors over time. For instance, certain species of whales and elephants have evolved unique immune system features that allow them to detect and eliminate abnormal cells more effectively than smaller animals. These immune responses, which are fine-tuned by evolution, may help prevent the unchecked cell growth that leads to cancer. Evolution of cancer resistance in large species. Larger animals may also benefit from a slower rate of cell division compared to smaller animals. This would reduce the overall number of opportunities for mutations to occur. In some species, the rate of cell turnover may be slower, meaning that their cells divide less frequently and thus have fewer chances to accumulate the mutations that lead to cancer. This slower metabolism may contribute to a reduced risk of developing cancer. Moreover, large animals, such as elephants, may have evolved better control over their cellular environment, including cell cycle regulation, which ensures that cells are not replicating uncontrollably. This can be attributed to the evolutionary pressures that larger species face, which would favor mechanisms that maintain cellular integrity over time. Cancer resistance and genetic evolution. The evolution of elephants and whales. The relatively low cancer rates observed in elephants are often cited as one of the most intriguing examples of Peto's paradox. Elephants have been found to have a much lower incidence of cancer, despite their massive size and long life expectancy. The key to their cancer resistance lies in their multiple copies of the TP53 gene, which is involved in the body's tumor-suppressing functions. This evolutionary advantage has allowed elephants to have a more robust defense against cellular mutations, keeping their cancer rates low. In addition to TP53, other large animals like whales and tortoises also appear to have evolved specialized genetic mechanisms to combat the development of cancer. These animals may have developed genetic adaptations that allow them to repair DNA more efficiently and suppress mutations at a higher rate than smaller species. The role of genetic diversity in cancer resistance. It is possible that large species have more genetic diversity and evolutionary flexibility, enabling them to adapt to environmental and genetic challenges, including those related to cancer. These genetic advantages are likely passed down through generations, enhancing their ability to resist cancer in a way that smaller animals cannot. As such, the paradox may point to the evolutionary importance of cancer resistance as a survival mechanism for large species. Implications of Peto's paradox for human cancer research. Cancer research and tumor suppression. Understanding Peto's paradox could have important implications for cancer research in humans, by studying how larger animals such as elephants, whales and tortoises have developed cancer resistance. Scientists may be able to identify new tumor-suppressing genes or mechanisms that can be applied to human cancer treatment. For example, the discovery of extra TP53 gene copies in elephants has opened new avenues for gene therapy and immunotherapy that could improve cancer treatment in humans. Potential for human cancer prevention. By studying the genetic adaptations that large animals have evolved to prevent cancer, we may gain insight into how genetic engineering or preventative measures could be used to reduce the incidence of cancer in humans. Furthermore, understanding how certain species have evolved to reduce cancer risk could lead to the development of novel treatments that target specific aspects of DNA repair, tumor suppression, and immune function. Conclusion: Peto's paradox and the future of cancer research. Rethinking cancer biology. Peto's paradox challenges our traditional understanding of cancer biology by suggesting that size and lifespan are not always directly correlated with cancer risk. Instead, larger animals appear to have evolved specific genetic and physiological mechanisms that help them avoid the mutations that typically lead to cancer. This paradox forces us to rethink the relationship between cancer, size, and evolution, and could lead to new insights in preventative medicine and cancer treatment. Implications for evolution and medicine. The study of Peto's paradox not only provides valuable insights into evolutionary biology, but also opens new avenues for medical research. By exploring the cancer resistance mechanisms of large animals, scientists may uncover new strategies for preventing and treating cancer in humans. The paradox suggests that there is more to cancer risk than just the number of cells or the length of time an organism lives, and understanding these factors could ultimately help us find new ways to combat cancer in the future. Pulsus paradoxus. What if a vital sign, something as fundamental as blood pressure, could be a clue to an underlying condition that might not be immediately apparent? Enter the pulsus paradoxus, a phenomenon in which blood pressure falls abnormally during inspiration and rises during expiration, breathing out, which is the opposite of what one would typically expect. This seemingly paradoxical pattern occurs in certain respiratory and cardiovascular conditions and can be a critical indicator of disease. So why does the body exhibit this paradoxical blood pressure fluctuation? And what can it tell us about a person's health? Pulsus paradoxus is most commonly observed in conditions like pericardial tamponade, asthma, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. And while the exact mechanisms behind the phenomenon are complex, the clinical implications are profound. When pulsus paradoxus is present, it suggests that the heart and lungs are not functioning in the optimal manner, and it may signal severe cardiovascular distress. Let's explore the pulsus paradoxus, where blood pressure and respiration intertwine in a surprising way, revealing deeper insights into health and disease. The term pulsus paradoxus was first described in 1873 by the physician Carl von Marfan of the famous Marfan syndrome, and was later popularized by other researchers in the field of cardiology. It was initially associated with pericardial tamponade, a condition in which fluid accumulation in the pericardial sac, the lining around the heart, exerts pressure on the heart, restricting its ability to expand fully during the cardiac cycle. The paradox was recognized as a significant clinical sign, especially in acute medical situations where a patient's blood pressure behaves unpredictably with each breath. In healthy individuals, the blood pressure remains relatively stable during both inspiration and expiration. However, in patients with certain cardiovascular and respiratory conditions, there is a significant drop in blood pressure during inspiration, sometimes by more than 10 mmHg, which is the hallmark of the pulsus paradoxus. The paradoxical decline in blood pressure occurs because of mechanical changes in the chest during inhalation, which affect the venous return to the heart, leading to a reduced stroke volume and subsequent blood pressure drop. While pulsus paradoxus is not a disease in itself, its presence can be an early warning sign of serious medical conditions like pericardial tamponade, severe asthma attacks, and COPD exacerbations, prompting clinicians to investigate underlying causes. Over the years, the discovery of pulsus paradoxus has informed the diagnosis and management of several respiratory and cardiovascular diseases, making it a critical clinical observation. Pulsus paradoxus is a clinical sign that involves an abnormal variation in blood pressure during the respiratory cycle. While it is commonly associated with conditions such as pericardial tamponade, asthma, and COPD, understanding the mechanisms behind this paradox and its implications in medical practice is essential for recognizing serious underlying conditions. Let's break down how pulsus paradoxus works and why it occurs in specific health conditions. Under normal circumstances, blood pressure and respiration are closely tied, but the variation is minimal and not noticeable in healthy individuals. During inspiration, breathing in, the diaphragm contracts and the thoracic cavity expands, creating a negative pressure within the chest. This negative pressure helps blood return to the right side of the heart via the venous system, increasing venous return and right ventricular filling. However, this does not typically cause any significant changes in blood pressure, as the heart and vascular system accommodate the increased volume efficiently. On the other hand, during expiration, breathing out, the diaphragm relaxes and the thoracic cavity compresses. This creates a positive pressure in the chest, which may temporarily reduce venous return. However, this reduction is usually insignificant in healthy individuals, and normal blood pressure is maintained. In a healthy person, blood pressure fluctuates mildly during the respiratory cycle, but the change is usually minor, typically less than 10 mmHg. However, when pulsus paradoxus occurs, there is a much more significant drop in systolic blood pressure during inspiration, often greater than 10 mmHg, indicating a problem with the heart's ability to pump blood efficiently during the inspiratory phase. Pulsus paradoxus refers to an exaggerated drop in systolic blood pressure during inspiration that is greater than 10 mmPh. This phenomenon is termed paradoxical because it contradicts the normal physiological response. In some cases, pulsus paradoxus can lead to a palpable decrease in the pulse amplitude or pulse pressure during inhalation. One of the most well-known causes of pulsus paradoxus is pericardial tamponade, a condition where there is an abnormal accumulation of fluid in the pericardial sac, the membrane surrounding the heart. This fluid accumulation increases pressure on the heart, particularly on the right ventricle, which impairs the heart's ability to expand fully during diastole, when the heart fills with blood. In pericardial tamponade, during inspiration, the negative pressure in the chest enhances the return of blood to the right side of the heart, but the compressed right ventricle cannot accommodate the increased volume. This causes a decreased stroke volume and consequently a significant drop in systolic blood pressure. In severe cases, pulsus paradoxus may be marked and easily detectable. Conditions such as asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, can also cause pulsus paradoxus, although the underlying mechanisms differ. In these conditions, bronchoconstriction and air trapping cause increased intrathoracic pressure, which affects the venous return to the heart. During inspiration, when the thoracic cavity expands, the heart may be temporarily compressed, particularly the right ventricle, leading to a drop in right ventricular filling and therefore systolic blood pressure. The pulsus paradoxus seen in asthma and COPD is often less pronounced than in pericardial tamponade, but still significant enough to be used diagnostically, particularly in acute exacerbations of asthma, where airway obstruction and respiratory distress exacerbate the condition. Other cardiovascular diseases, such as pulmonary embolism, a blockage in the pulmonary arteries, heart failure, and cardiogenic shock, can also cause pulsus paradoxus. These conditions often result in impaired right ventricular function or elevated intrathoracic pressure, leading to the same pathophysiological changes seen in pericardial tamponade or respiratory conditions. In these cases, pulsus paradoxus may be a sign of acute cardiovascular distress, signaling the need for urgent medical intervention. Pulsus paradoxus occurs because of an interference with normal heart function during the respiratory cycle. During inspiration, the following events take place in the body. Increased venous return to the right side of the heart due to the negative pressure created in the chest cavity. In normal conditions, the right ventricle accommodates this additional volume. But in conditions like pericardial tamponade or right ventricular dysfunction, the heart cannot fully expand to accept the increased volume of blood. This results in a decrease in stroke volume, the amount of blood pumped by the heart with each beat, leading to a drop in systolic blood pressure. In severe cases, the blood pressure drop exceeds 10 macromyastics. In conditions like asthma and COPD, air trapping and bronchoconstriction increase intrathoracic pressure, which can affect cardiac output. The leftward shift of the intrathoracic pressure during inspiration exacerbates the reduction in right ventricular filling, leading to the characteristic drop in blood pressure. Pulsus paradoxus is typically diagnosed during a physical examination. The clinician measures the systolic blood pressure during both inspiration and expiration, noting any significant differences. In healthy individuals, the systolic blood pressure may fluctuate slightly during respiration, but it does not drop by more than 10 millimeters. In patients with pulsus paradoxus, the drop in systolic pressure is often greater than 10 millimeters. To diagnose pulsus paradoxus, the following steps are typically taken. Measure the blood pressure during normal breathing. Have the patient take a deep breath and observe any change in the systolic blood pressure. A drop of more than 10 megmeters during inspiration is indicative of pulsus paradoxus. Detecting pulsus paradoxus can provide critical information about a patient's condition, particularly in cases of pericardial tamponade, severe asthma, or COPD exacerbations. The presence of pulsus paradoxus often indicates a severe underlying pathology that requires immediate attention. For example, in pericardial tamponade, the treatment typically involves draining the excess fluid from the pericardial sac to relieve the pressure on the heart. In asthma and COPD, bronchodilators and anti-inflammatory medications may be used to reduce airway constriction and improve cardiac function. The presence of pulsus paradoxus is a significant diagnostic clue in the evaluation of patients with cardiovascular and respiratory conditions. The paradoxical drop in systolic blood pressure during inspiration can point to severe conditions such as pericardial tamponade, severe asthma, or pulmonary embolism. Recognizing pulsus paradoxus during a physical exam allows healthcare providers to identify underlying issues and initiate timely interventions. For clinicians, understanding the underlying mechanisms behind pulsus paradoxus is essential in determining the most appropriate treatment. Whether it's the drainage of pericardial fluid in tamponade or the administration of bronchodilators in asthma, the early identification of pulsus paradoxus can improve patient outcomes by allowing for more targeted and effective care. Second wind paradox. Have you ever experienced a moment during intense physical exertion when you feel completely out of breath and fatigued, only to suddenly feel an inexplicable surge of energy that allows you to push through? This is the phenomenon known as the second wind paradox. The surprising shift in endurance during physical activity. When you hit a wall, mentally and physically drained, yet out of nowhere you find yourself with newfound strength and energy that allows you to continue. How can this happen? How can the body go from feeling utterly exhausted to revitalized in a short period of time? The second wind paradox challenges our understanding of fatigue and endurance, suggesting that there is more to human performance than meets the eye. Despite physical limits, the body has an incredible ability to push beyond what we perceive as its boundaries. This paradox leads us to ask, what causes the sudden shift from fatigue to renewed strength? And how does the body find its second wind in moments of extreme exertion? Let's explore the second wind paradox, where the body's resilience and capacity for endurance defy conventional expectations. The term second wind was first coined in the early 20th century to describe the phenomenon experienced by athletes during intense physical exertion, particularly during running or endurance sports. Athletes and exercisers often reported experiencing a sudden surge of energy, a shift from feeling exhausted to having the stamina to continue at a higher intensity. The concept of the second wind became more formally recognized in exercise physiology and sports medicine, as researchers began to explore the physiological mechanisms behind this phenomenon. Second wind occurs during prolonged physical activities, such as running, cycling, or swimming, typically after the athlete has experienced an initial period of fatigue or oxygen debt. This paradox has puzzled scientists and sports professionals alike, as it challenges the traditional understanding of energy systems and the limits of human performance. For much of the 20th century, the prevailing view of exercise was that fatigue and oxygen consumption were directly correlated. However, the second wind suggested that fatigue is not always the result of oxygen depletion or lactic acid buildup. Instead, a complex interplay of hormonal, neurological, and musculoskeletal factors seemed to contribute to the body's ability to push beyond what was previously considered the limit of endurance. Researchers began to investigate how mental and physical factors combine to create a phenomenon where, after an initial energy crash, the body's endurance seemingly rebounds in unexpected ways. The second wind paradox is a complex physiological and psychological phenomenon that occurs during prolonged physical exertion. It represents a sudden shift from feeling physically exhausted to experiencing a renewed surge of energy and endurance, which allows the individual to continue exerting themselves at a higher intensity. This paradox has intrigued scientists, athletes, and fitness enthusiasts alike, as it defies conventional understanding of the body's fatigue mechanisms. Understanding the second wind requires an exploration of the body's energy systems, psychological factors, and the intricate relationship between muscle function, oxygen delivery, and mental focus. Fatigue during physical exertion is typically the result of depleted energy stores and the buildup of byproducts like lactic acid in the muscles. The body primarily relies on three energy systems during physical activity: the ATPP system, the anaerobic system, and the aerobic system. The ATPP system is used during short bursts of explosive energy such as sprinting or weightlifting, but is depleted within seconds. The anaerobic system kicks in when oxygen is insufficient for the energy demands of the body, such as during high-intensity exercise. This system produces lactic acid, which can contribute to the sensation of muscle burn and fatigue. The aerobic system is used during prolonged, moderate-intensity activities and relies on the body's ability to take in and deliver oxygen to muscles. During prolonged exercise, the body switches between these systems, and as energy stores deplete and oxygen levels drop, athletes often experience the onset of fatigue. In theory, this fatigue represents the body's inability to continue functioning at the required intensity. However, the second wind is a counterintuitive phenomenon where, despite these physiological challenges, the body appears to recover and find new energy. A common explanation for fatigue is the concept of oxygen debt, which occurs when the body is unable to supply enough oxygen to the muscles during intense exertion. This leads to the anaerobic metabolism of glucose, resulting in the production of lactic acid as a byproduct. High levels of lactic acid contribute to the burning sensation in muscles and the overall feeling of fatigue. Interestingly, the second wind seems to occur after the body shifts from anaerobic to aerobic metabolism. As the muscles begin to receive more oxygen, they can clear lactic acid from the system, reducing the feelings of fatigue and allowing the athlete to continue at a higher level of intensity. This shift from anaerobic to aerobic energy production is often thought to be responsible for the second wind, allowing individuals to push through the initial fatigue and perform at a higher level. The release of endorphins, the body's natural painkillers, plays a significant role in the second wind. As exercise continues, the body may release endorphins to counteract the physical discomfort and fatigue experienced during exertion. Endorphins interact with opioid receptors in the brain, reducing the perception of pain and increasing pleasure or euphoria. This phenomenon, often referred to as the runner's high, can make athletes feel a sense of renewed energy and motivation, leading to an improvement in performance after a period of fatigue. The release of endorphins can contribute to the second wind by reducing pain perception, allowing individuals to push through the discomfort of exercise. This neurological shift, combined with physical recovery, may provide the sudden burst of energy that defines the second wind. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for the body's fight or flight response, releasing adrenaline, epinephrine, into the bloodstream. Adrenaline increases heart rate, blood flow, and oxygen delivery to muscles, preparing the body for intense physical activity. This can play a role in the second wind by improving oxygenation and increasing muscular efficiency. When athletes feel they are approaching exhaustion, the body's sympathetic nervous system may activate to provide a temporary surge of energy. This hormonal response can increase performance and allow individuals to continue their activity at a higher intensity, effectively providing them with a second wind. The second wind is not only a physical phenomenon, but also a psychological one. Mental resilience and focus can significantly impact an individual's ability to continue pushing through fatigue. When athletes experience physical exhaustion, mental distraction or focus on external factors can shift attention away from the discomfort and allow for increased performance. For example, focusing on the finish line in a race or pushing through mental barriers during a workout can trigger the second wind by improving mental clarity and motivation. Psychological factors, such as self-talk and positive reinforcement, can also play a key role in overcoming fatigue. The belief that the body can continue and the mental focus to power through the struggle often precede the physical surge that characterizes the second wind. The expectation that a second wind will occur may also contribute to its psychological effect. When athletes push through an initial period of fatigue, they may anticipate the possibility of a recovery phase. This expectation may enhance their mental focus and create a sense of hope, encouraging them to continue despite physical discomfort. Placebo effects, the belief that recovery or energy will come, can activate mental and physical processes that actually facilitate recovery, making the second wind a self-fulfilling experience. Athletes who regularly engage in endurance training are more likely to experience this second wind phenomenon. Over time, training helps the body adapt to higher levels of exertion and fatigue resistance. As endurance improves, the body becomes more efficient at managing lactic acid buildup and oxygen debt, making it easier to recover from periods of exertion and continue performing. Moreover, endurance training can lead to an increase in mitochondrial density within muscle cells, enhancing the body's ability to produce energy aerobically. This physical adaptation supports the body's ability to find a second wind during long bouts of exercise. The second wind is also linked to mental resilience, the ability to reframe feelings of fatigue and push through mental barriers. Athletes who can reinterpret exhaustion as a sign of progress rather than a limitation often experience the second wind. This mental shift, combined with physiological recovery, allows for improved endurance and the ability to push beyond perceived limits. The second wind paradox is a fascinating phenomenon that demonstrates the complex interplay between physical, neurological, and psychological factors in endurance. It challenges traditional views of fatigue, showing that exhaustion does not necessarily mark the end of physical capacity. Instead, it often signals the beginning of a recovery phase, where the body's resilience, coupled with hormonal and psychological mechanisms, allows for a surge of energy. Ultimately, the second wind highlights the importance of both mental resilience and physical conditioning in achieving peak performance. It reminds us that while the body may reach points of exhaustion, the capacity for recovery and renewed energy lies in the body's ability to adapt, physically, mentally, and emotionally, to the challenges of prolonged exertion. Leventhal paradox. Imagine a tiny molecule, a protein, composed of hundreds or even thousands of amino acids. This protein must fold into a precise shape to function correctly in the body. Now consider this. The number of possible ways the protein could fold is astronomical, far beyond the computational capacity of any modern machine. And yet, despite this, the protein folds into the correct shape efficiently in a matter of seconds to minutes. How is this possible? This is the heart of the Leventhal paradox, a puzzle in the field of molecular biology that challenges our understanding of how proteins fold. If proteins were to explore all possible configurations to find the correct one, it would take longer than the age of the universe to reach the correct structure. And yet, proteins fold in seconds. How can something so complex and seemingly random unfold so quickly and accurately? The Leventhal paradox highlights a critical mystery of molecular biology. How do proteins fold so efficiently in such a vast landscape of possible shapes? Let's explore the Leventhal paradox, where molecular complexity, efficiency, and the mysteries of life collide in a profound biological conundrum. The Leventhal paradox was first introduced by biophysicist Cyrus Leventhal in 1968 as a way to highlight a fundamental problem in protein folding. Leventhal was trying to understand how proteins, which are made up of long chains of amino acids, fold into their specific three-dimensional shapes with incredible speed and accuracy. At the time, scientists were aware that proteins are linear chains of amino acids, but the process by which these chains fold into their final functional structures remained a mystery. Leventhal's insight came from calculating how long it would take for a protein to fold by randomly exploring all possible configurations. Given that each amino acid could potentially occupy a wide range of positions and orientations, the number of possible conformations for even a small protein is immense. Leventhal's calculation showed that if a protein were to explore each possible configuration to find the correct folded shape, it would take astronomical amounts of time, far longer than the lifespan of the universe itself. Despite this, proteins fold quickly in living organisms, often in seconds to minutes. This discrepancy between theoretical timescales and observed folding times became known as the Leventhal paradox. It remains one of the most significant and unresolved questions in molecular biology. Since Leventhal's original work, scientists have made considerable progress in understanding protein folding, leading to the development of the field of computational biology. Yet, the paradox still highlights fundamental questions about how molecular systems can achieve such incredible efficiency. The Leventhal paradox is a striking challenge to our understanding of protein folding, a fundamental process in molecular biology. Proteins are essential biological molecules that perform a vast array of functions in the body, from enzymatic activity to cellular structure to signal transduction. These molecules are formed by chains of amino acids, which fold into specific three-dimensional shapes that determine their function. The paradox arises from the astonishing fact that this folding process, which appears to involve searching through an enormous number of possible configurations, is accomplished in a fraction of a second. Proteins are made of polypeptide chains, which are sequences of amino acids. Each amino acid has a unique side chain, or R group, that affects the protein's overall structure. The sequence of amino acids dictates the way the chain folds into its final functional conformation. This folded structure is essential for the protein to carry out its specific role in the cell, whether it is catalyzing chemical reactions, providing structural support, or facilitating communication between cells. Proteins can fold into a wide variety of structures, from simple linear shapes to complex globular forms. However, for a protein to be functional, it must fold into a precise structure dictated by its amino acid sequence. The process of folding is guided by chemical interactions such as hydrogen bonds, ionic bonds, and hydrophobic interactions between the amino acids. The main challenge posed by the Leventhal paradox is the sheer number of possible configurations that a protein could theoretically adopt. A typical protein is composed of hundreds or thousands of amino acids. Each amino acid in the chain has multiple potential positions and angles at which it could interact with neighboring amino acids. This gives rise to an almost infinite number of potential folding pathways, making the problem of finding the correct folded structure a seemingly impossible task. To illustrate the scale of the problem, imagine a protein with just 100 amino acids. If each amino acid could adopt 10 different configurations, the number of possible conformations would be on the order of 10 to the power of 100, a number far greater than the total number of atoms in the universe. If a protein were to explore every possible configuration in search of the correct one, the process would take far longer than the age of the universe. Despite this, proteins fold in just seconds to minutes in living organisms, defying Levinthal's initial calculation. The Levinthal paradox thus presents a fundamental question. How can proteins fold so quickly and efficiently when the number of possible folding pathways is so vast? One of the key insights into resolving the Levinthal paradox comes from the principle of local energy minimization. While a protein might theoretically have an astronomical number of possible configurations, it is unlikely to explore each one randomly. Instead, proteins tend to fold in a way that minimizes their free energy, the energy available to do work. The process of folding can be viewed as a journey in which the protein gradually moves toward the most stable conformation, the one with the lowest free energy. Proteins do not explore every possible configuration randomly. Instead, they follow a pathway in which local interactions between amino acids stabilize the folding process. The protein chooses configurations that are energetically favorable, rapidly eliminating those that are less stable. This allows the protein to fold in a much shorter time frame than would be expected if it were to explore all possibilities. In many cases, proteins are assisted in their folding by chaperone proteins. Chaperones are specialized molecules that help other proteins fold properly by stabilizing them during the folding process. They prevent proteins from aggregating or misfolding by providing an environment where the protein can fold correctly without interference from other molecules. These chaperones may also help proteins reach their native functional state by guiding them along the correct folding pathway. Chaperones are essential for the proper function of many complex proteins. For example, heat shock proteins, a type of chaperone, are upregulated in response to stress and help proteins fold properly under conditions that might otherwise cause misfolding. The interaction with chaperones greatly speeds up the folding process and helps reduce the risk of protein misfolding, which is associated with diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. To explain the speed and efficiency of protein folding, scientists used the folding funnel model. This model describes the folding process as a funnel, where the protein starts from a large number of possible conformations at the top of the funnel and gradually moves towards a single, stable, folded structure at the bottom of the funnel. The idea is that as the protein progresses through the folding process, the number of possible configurations decreases, and the protein is guided toward a lower energy state through a series of small steps. Rather than exploring all possible configurations, the protein is funneled toward a small number of stable intermediates, which make the overall process much faster. This model helps explain how proteins can efficiently fold in a short amount of time, despite the immense number of potential conformations. In recent years, computational biology and molecular dynamics simulations have advanced to the point where researchers can model protein folding with increasing accuracy. These simulations use powerful computers to calculate the interactions between atoms in the protein and simulate how the protein will fold under different conditions. However, even with modern computational tools, simulating protein folding remains a highly complex and time-consuming task. Scientists are still working on developing more efficient algorithms that can accurately predict protein folding pathways in less time. One area of active research is in using artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning to predict protein structures more accurately, which has the potential to accelerate our understanding of protein folding and its relationship to diseases. Predictive algorithms, such as those developed for the protein folding problem, e.g. DeepMind's AlphaFold, have shown significant promise in recent years. These algorithms use machine learning techniques to predict the three-dimensional structures of proteins based on their amino acid sequences. While these methods cannot solve the Levinthal paradox entirely, they provide a more efficient way to predict protein folding without having to explore every possible configuration. The study of the Levinthal paradox has far-reaching implications for understanding diseases associated with protein misfolding. Conditions such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and cystic fibrosis are often caused by proteins that fail to fold correctly or aggregate into harmful structures. Understanding the principles behind efficient protein folding can lead to new treatments and therapies for these diseases. In particular, the role of chaperone proteins in preventing misfolding and promoting correct folding has led to the development of potential therapeutic strategies aimed at enhancing the function of chaperones in patients with protein folding diseases. It's our paradox. In a world of ever-advancing technology, radio frequency radiation, RF, is all around us, from from the smartphones we carry to the Wi-Fi signals in our homes and the towers that support our wireless communication systems. As the use of wireless technology has surged in recent decades, concerns over the potential health risks associated with exposure to radio frequency, RF, radiation have also increased. The SAR paradox refers to the contradiction between current health guidelines for safe exposure levels to RF radiation and increased evidence of potential health risks. Specifically, specific absorption rate, SAR, is the measure of the rate at which the body absorbs RF energy, often used to determine whether a device like a smartphone is safe for regular use. However, despite safety standards based on SAR, there are growing concerns about the long-term effects of exposure to even low levels of RF radiation. How can we reconcile the paradox where RF radiation is considered safe based on current SAR guidelines, yet there is increasing evidence that long-term exposure may have health implications, such as brain tumors, cancer, or neurological disorders? The SAR paradox forces us to reconsider the relationship between radiation exposure, safety standards, and health risks, prompting further investigation into the true impact of our modern, interconnected lives. The SAR paradox is rooted in ongoing debates over the safety of radio frequency, RF, radiation, and its potential health risks. The concept of specific absorption rate, SAR, emerged as a means to measure how much RF energy is absorbed by the human body when exposed to devices, such as mobile phones, Wi-Fi routers, and other wireless communication technologies. SAR measurements became a standard tool in the 1990s as mobile phones and wireless technologies rapidly expanded in consumer use. The goal was to establish safe limits for RF exposure, based on the idea that excessive exposure could lead to adverse health effects, including brain tumors, cancer, and neurological disorders. In response to growing concerns about the safety of mobile phones and wireless technologies, regulatory agencies like the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, and the World Health Organization, WHO, have established SAR guidelines to ensure that mobile devices emit RF radiation levels within safe limits. These limits are designed to keep exposure well below levels that could cause thermal effects, the process by which RF energy heats tissue in the body, potentially leading to tissue damage. However, as the use of mobile phones and wireless devices has increased, research into the long-term effects of RF exposure has grown more contentious. While some studies have shown no direct link between SAR levels and adverse health outcomes, others have suggested that prolonged exposure to low levels of RF radiation might lead to cancer and other serious health issues. The SAR paradox thus centers on the challenge of balancing safe exposure limits with the potential long-term health risks that could emerge from continued and widespread use of RF-emitting technologies. The SAR paradox revolves around the tension between the current safety standards for radio frequency, RF radiation, and the potential long-term health risks that are still being debated by scientists. SAR is the measure used to assess the amount of RF energy absorbed by the human body, especially in relation to mobile phones and wireless devices. This paradox raises important questions about whether current SAR guidelines are sufficient to protect public health, especially as new research suggests that low-level exposure to RF radiation could have harmful effects over time. Specific absorption rate, SAR, is a measure of the rate at which the human body absorbs radio frequency energy. SAR is typically expressed in watts per kilogram, W/kg, and is used to assess the potential risks associated with mobile phone radiation. The primary concern with RF radiation exposure is its potential to cause thermal effects, the heating of body tissue. The higher the SAR, the more RF energy the body absorbs, increasing the potential for tissue damage and burns. In the context of mobile phones, SAR testing measures how much RF radiation the phone emits when held close to the body, typically near the head or ear during a call. This measure ensures that devices meet safety standards and are not releasing excessive amounts of radiation that could potentially harm users. SAR safety guidelines have been set by regulatory bodies like the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, in the US, and the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, ICNIRP. In the US, the FCC mandates that mobile phones must not exceed a SAR value of 1.6 W/kg, averaged over a 1-gram tissue sample. This standard is based on the premise that thermal effects of RF radiation can cause tissue damage if the SAR value exceeds certain thresholds. In theory, these guidelines are designed to keep exposure levels low enough to prevent harmful heating of body tissues. However, the SAR paradox arises because non-thermal effects, such as cellular damage or long-term health consequences, are not fully understood, and current guidelines may not account for these potential risks. The thermal effect of RF radiation is well understood. High doses of radiation can heat tissue, potentially leading to burns or tissue damage. However, concerns about the non-thermal effects of RF radiation, such as its potential to cause cancer, neurological disorders, and other long-term health issues, remain a point of contention in the scientific community. Many studies have focused on the potential links between RF radiation and brain tumors, specifically gliomas, a type of brain cancer. Some studies have suggested a correlation between mobile phone use and an increased risk of brain tumors, while others have found no significant relationship. The SAR paradox arises because SAR guidelines are based on the assumption that thermal effects are the primary concern, but these standards do not address the possible non-thermal effects of long-term RF exposure. The relationship between RF radiation and brain cancer has been one of the most controversial aspects of the SAR paradox. Some researchers have proposed that RF radiation could disrupt cellular structures and lead to DNA damage, increasing the risk of mutations that could result in tumor formation. Studies investigating the risk of glioma and other brain tumors in mobile phone users have yielded conflicting results, with some showing an increased risk and others showing no significant association. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, classified radio frequency electromagnetic fields as a possible carcinogen, Group 2B, in 2011, based on limited evidence linking RF radiation to an increased risk of brain cancer. However, this classification does not definitively confirm a causal relationship and calls for further research on the issue. In addition to cancer concerns, studies have suggested that long-term exposure to RF radiation might have effects on neurological health. Potential concerns include cognitive decline, memory impairment, and changes in brain activity. There is some evidence suggesting that exposure to RF radiation might disrupt electrical activity in the brain, but research is still inconclusive. In this regard, the SAR paradox challenges the assumption that RF exposure at levels deemed safe by current SAR standards is harmless. While SAR levels are regulated to prevent thermal damage, the long-term, low-level exposure to RF radiation, such as from daily mobile phone use over many years, may still have effects that we don't fully understand. The SAR paradox arises when considering low-level exposure to RF radiation. Current SAR guidelines focus primarily on the immediate thermal effects of high RF exposure, which are relatively easy to measure and quantify. However, the long-term effects of low-level RF exposure, such as those from daily mobile phone use, are more difficult to study and measure, leading to uncertainty about the true health risks. Some studies have indicated that even low-level exposure may be associated with adverse health outcomes, but the scientific community has not reached a consensus on whether this exposure is truly harmful. The SAR paradox lies in the gap between what is currently considered safe by regulatory standards and the unknown potential risks of prolonged, low-level exposure. Another aspect of the SAR paradox is the inconsistencies in research findings. While many studies have failed to show clear links between RF radiation and health issues, other studies have suggested a correlation between mobile phone use and various health problems. The difficulty in drawing firm conclusions from existing research creates confusion, particularly when SAR guidelines are used as the basis for safety standards. Some researchers argue that the SAR guidelines may be outdated or insufficient, as they do not account for potential non-thermal effects. This has led to calls for revised safety standards that consider both thermal and non-thermal effects of RF exposure. The SAR paradox also highlights the evolving nature of technology and RF exposure levels. With the rollout of 5G networks and the increasing number of devices that emit RF radiation, the overall exposure of the general population is likely to increase in the coming years. As technology advances, it is important to reassess SR standards and determine whether the current thresholds are adequate to ensure public safety in a world of increasingly pervasive wireless technology. To address the SAR paradox, regulatory bodies must consider the long-term effects of RF radiation in their safety guidelines. Current SAR standards are based primarily on the prevention of thermal effects, but new research should account for potential non-thermal effects. Reassessing safety guidelines to incorporate these factors would ensure that RF exposure remains within safe levels. Even as the scientific community continues to study the potential risks of RF radiation, individuals can take precautionary measures to limit their exposure. These include using hands-free devices, keeping phones away from the body, limiting phone use, and using air tube headsets instead of traditional wired headphones. Additionally, promoting public awareness about SAR and the potential risks of excessive RF exposure can empower individuals to make informed decisions about their technology usage. Bootstrap Paradox. What if I told you that a person could exist without ever being created? That a book, idea, or object could have no origin? An object that was always there but never truly created? This is the heart of the Bootstrap Paradox, a mind-bending concept that questions the very nature of cause and effect. Imagine you travel back in time and give Shakespeare a copy of one of his famous works, Hamlet, which he then reads and subsequently writes himself, thus creating the play. Now, the paradox. Who created Hamlet? Was it Shakespeare, or was it you who travelled back in time? The Bootstrap Paradox explores the idea of self-creation or causal loops, where something exists without a clear origin or beginning because it has been passed through time without a true point of creation. The paradox plays with the concept of time travel, causality, and temporal loops, where events cause themselves, challenging our understanding of how time and events are supposed to unfold. Let's dive deep into the Bootstrap Paradox, a riddle that forces us to reconsider the relationship between past, present, and future, where objects, ideas, and even people seem to exist without ever being truly created. The Bootstrap Paradox, also known as a causal loop, is a time travel paradox that has captured the imagination of philosophers, physicists, and science fiction writers. The term bootstrap comes from the idea of pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps, a metaphor for self-creation or self-sufficiency without any external influence. The concept has been explored in various forms throughout the history of science fiction, but its deeper philosophical implications and its relationship to causality became more widely discussed in the 20th century, particularly as time travel theories gained traction in popular culture. One of the earliest mentions of the Bootstrap Paradox came from Robert Heinlein's 1941 science fiction novel By His Bootstraps. The novel features a time traveller who meets a version of himself from the future and through a series of events essentially creates himself in a loop that has no clear origin. In the novel, a book becomes the central object that gets passed through time, just as in the common interpretation of the paradox, where an object is sent back in time and its creation is attributed to a loop with no external origin. The paradox received broader attention with the advent of time travel movies like Back to the Future, 1985, where characters interact with their past selves and create events that result in a self-fulfilling loop. The paradox poses a serious philosophical dilemma regarding causality, challenging our understanding of the linear progression of events and whether time can be truly circular. The Bootstrap Paradox forces us to question whether events can exist without cause, or if they are part of a never-ending cycle that loops back upon itself. The Bootstrap Paradox is a fundamental riddle in the realm of time travel, causality, and the nature of time. The paradox occurs when an object, piece of information, or person is sent back in time, and the timeline loops in such a way that the object or idea has no true origin. The paradox challenges our understanding of cause and effect because the object or idea seems to exist without being created, as it was passed back in time by its future self. The core of the Bootstrap Paradox lies in the concept of self-creation. A time traveller travels back in time and gives Shakespeare a copy of Hamlet, which Shakespeare then copies and claims as his own creation. Now, the question arises, who created Hamlet? Was it Shakespeare? Or was it the time traveller who brought the play back to him? Both individuals seem to have created the play, but there is no origin for the play itself, because it's as if the play came from nowhere and exists without a true creator. This paradox is often illustrated with a book, object, or idea that is passed from the future to the past in such a way that its existence creates a temporal loop. The object or idea simply exists, having no definitive point in time where it was created. This is where the term bootstrap comes in, the concept of self-generation or self-existence that defies traditional causality. The Bootstrap Paradox exists within the broader concept of causal loops in time travel. A causal loop is a scenario in which a cause and effect are reversed or intertwined in such a way that the effect itself becomes the cause. In the case of the Bootstrap Paradox, an object or idea creates itself by traveling backward in time. The paradox raises profound questions about the nature of time, whether time can truly loop back on itself, and how we can understand the origins of things in such a system. The key to understanding this paradox is the temporal loop, in which an event is its own cause. This challenges the classical understanding of linear time, where one event leads to another in a unidirectional flow. In a causal loop, the timeline seems to fold in on itself, and the past, present, and future are no longer distinct and sequential, but rather a circular system in which events cause each other across time. The Bootstrap Paradox is a type of temporal circuit. In this circuit, events from the future influence the past, and those past events ultimately cause the future events to occur in the first place. This creates a closed loop with no clear beginning or end, an infinite loop that has no origin point. The object or idea that is passed through time is essentially a perpetual motion machine. It exists without being created or destroyed. In the case of the Shakespeare example, the play exists because it was passed back in time. Shakespeare did not create it by himself, he only received it from the time traveller. The play never truly originates from any one person. Its creation is a result of the time loop. This concept raises several philosophical questions. Can something exist without cause? If an object has no clear origin, what does that say about our understanding of time and causality? Does this paradox imply that time is not linear, but rather a circular or recursive system? The paradox forces us to reconsider our basic assumptions about causality and the direction of time. Another version of the Bootstrap Paradox involves information rather than physical objects. For instance, imagine a time traveller who goes back in time to give a scientist a set of blueprints for a revolutionary invention. The scientist then builds the invention, which the time traveller uses in the future to go back in time to give the scientist the blueprints in the first place. Here, the blueprints exist, but they have no origin. They are passed from the future to the past, creating a paradox where the information exists without a clear source. This paradox is similar to the informational bootstrap, where knowledge, ideas, or inventions seem to come from nowhere, having no true inventor or creator. The cycle continues perpetually, with the invention or idea existing because it is passed backward in time, but never originating at any point in history. One possible solution to the Bootstrap Paradox is the multiverse hypothesis, which suggests that every action in time travel may create an alternative timeline or universe. In this scenario, the loop does not take place in a single timeline, but rather in an infinite set of timelines, where the object or idea exists in one timeline and is then passed to a parallel universe where it is used to create itself. The multiverse hypothesis allows for the existence of self-created objects and ideas without violating the principles of causality, as each event occurs in a different timeline. However, this solution raises other questions, such as how do we define the boundaries of parallel universes? If the object or idea exists in multiple timelines, which one is considered the true origin of the object? Another potential solution is the Novikov self-consistency principle, which posits that events in a time loop will always unfold in such a way that no paradox occurs. According to this principle, if time travel were possible, the events in the loop would always unfold to preserve the consistency of the timeline. In the case of the Bootstrap Paradox, this principle would suggest that the loop is always self-consistent, meaning the play or idea would always exist in this loop, with no contradictions or causal paradoxes. The Novikov principle allows for causal loops without violating the laws of physics, but it also suggests that the past is fixed, and time travel cannot be used to alter events. The Bootstrap Paradox challenges the very concept of causality, the idea that events have a clear cause and effect. In the case of a self-created object, we cannot trace a linear cause for its existence. This raises deeper philosophical questions about the nature of time, cause and effect, and the direction in which time flows. The arrow of time, a concept in thermodynamics and cosmology, suggests that time moves in one direction, forward. The Bootstrap Paradox presents a challenge to this idea, as it introduces the possibility of events that loop back on themselves, disrupting the concept of linear time. The Bootstrap Paradox also has parallels with self-referential paradoxes, such as the liar paradox, e.g., this sentence is false. Just as self-referential statements can lead to contradictions, so too does the Bootstrap Paradox, where an object or idea seems to exist without origin, creating a logical loop that is difficult to resolve. The paradox forces us to reconsider the nature of self-referential paradoxes in both logic and time. Predestination paradox. Imagine a world where the future is already written, and every action you take is predestined, yet you still feel as if you have the freedom to make your own choices. The predestination paradox is a mind-bending concept from time travel theory that suggests the possibility that the future has already been determined, and yet, the act of choosing is still a part of this predetermined path. In this paradox, an individual might travel back in time, only to realize that their actions in the past are exactly what lead to their future, as though their destiny was always set in motion by their own future actions. What if you were the very cause of your own existence, or the events that shape your future? Could you break free from this chain of causality, or are you forever bound to repeat the same outcomes? The predestination paradox challenges our understanding of free will, causality, and time itself. It raises the question, if the future is predestined, how can we truly make choices, and are we ever truly in control of our fates? Let's explore the predestination paradox, where time, free will, and the illusion of choice collide in a cyclical, inevitable dance. The predestination paradox finds its roots in discussions about time travel and causality that date back to the works of philosophers and theoretical physicists. The paradox is closely associated with the idea of closed time-like curves, CTCs, a concept within the field of general relativity introduced by Kurt Gödel in 1949. Gödel's work proposed that the laws of general relativity allowed for the theoretical possibility of time loops, paths through spacetime where an object or person could travel backward in time, thereby creating causal loops. In popular culture, the predestination paradox is often represented in science fiction. One of the most famous depictions comes from Robert A. Heinlein's 1959 short story, All You Zombies, where a time traveler creates their own existence by traveling to the past to become their own parent. This story perfectly exemplifies the paradox. The protagonist is both the cause and the effect of their own existence. In philosophical discussions, the predestination paradox challenges our understanding of free will and causality. If time is a loop, with actions in the past determining the future, does this mean that everything is predetermined? Can a person make genuine choices, or are they merely playing a part in a pre-written script? The predestination paradox is a powerful and thought-provoking concept that invites deep questions about the nature of time, causality, and free will. It presents the idea that time travel, if it were possible, could create scenarios where the past and future are inseparable and inevitably linked. The predestination paradox is a complex and paradoxical concept that arises when time travel is involved in a way that creates a closed loop of causality. It challenges our conventional understanding of free will, cause and effect, and the nature of time itself. The paradox presents a scenario in which actions taken in the past directly influence the future, yet the future, in turn, shapes the past, creating a cyclical loop of cause and effect. In such a loop, the concept of free will becomes entangled with the idea that events are already predetermined, leading to a paradox where choice and destiny seem to be at odds. A closed time-like curve, CTC, is a concept from general relativity that refers to a path in spacetime that loops back on itself. In simple terms, it is a theoretical route through the fabric of spacetime that allows an object, or person, to return to a point in the past, creating a temporal loop. This concept is important in understanding the predestination paradox, because it opens the possibility that an event in the future can cause an event in the past, creating a closed loop of causality. For example, if a person travels back in time to stop a catastrophic event, their actions may end up being the very thing that causes the event to occur in the first place. In such a scenario, the individual is trapped in a loop where the past and future are tightly interconnected and impossible to separate. The predestination paradox emerges when we consider the consequences of such a closed loop in time. The key question it raises is, if the past and future are inseparable, does this mean that everything is predetermined? Can we truly make choices, or are we simply following a predestined path that was always meant to happen? For example, imagine a time traveler who goes back in time to warn people about an impending disaster. However, the warning they give ends up being the cause of the disaster. The cause and effect of the event become intertwined with no clear starting point. This creates a situation where the time traveler's actions in the past are both the cause and the result of the disaster in the future, leading to a closed, causal loop that defies the normal flow of time. One of the most profound implications of the predestination paradox is its impact on our understanding of free will. If our actions are predetermined by future events, can we truly be said to have the ability to choose our actions? In a world governed by closed loops of causality, the idea of free will may be rendered meaningless. In the predestination paradox, the individual may believe they are choosing to travel back in time or to make certain decisions, but in reality these choices are already set in motion by events that will occur in the future. This creates a situation where free will is merely an illusion and the individual is simply playing their part in a preordained sequence of events. The paradox becomes even more complicated when we consider the fact that a time traveler, in attempting to change the past, may end up reinforcing the very future they were trying to avoid. This creates a feedback loop in which actions in the past and future are continuously influencing each other. For instance, a time traveler might try to prevent a catastrophe by traveling back in time, only to discover that their actions were the very cause of the catastrophe in the first place. The paradox lies in the fact that their attempt to change history is both the cause and the effect of the historical event. This feedback loop can make it difficult to determine whether choices are truly free or whether they are simply part of a pre-written sequence that must occur in order to preserve the timeline. In this sense, the predestination paradox presents a world in which time travel and free will seem to be in conflict, with individuals unable to change the course of events, no matter how hard they try. A causal loop occurs when an event in the future causes an event in the past, which in turn causes the event in the future. In the predestination paradox, these loops become a central feature of the narrative. The paradox suggests that events are not linear, but instead form a circular pattern, where actions in the past are influenced by actions that will occur in the future. For example, a time traveler who is sent back in time to deliver a message may discover that the message they were sent to deliver is one they themselves originally received from a future version of themselves. This creates a loop in which events are self-originating, with no clear starting point or end. The past and future are entangled, making it impossible to separate cause from effect. The predestination paradox also raises interesting questions about personal identity. If a person is both the cause and the effect of an event, it becomes difficult to determine whether they are truly acting freely or whether their actions are part of a larger, preordained sequence. This raises important questions about the nature of identity and whether we are truly the authors of our own actions or merely players in a cosmic narrative. The predestination paradox is often explored in science fiction stories and time travel films, such as 12 Monkeys, 1995, and Predestination in 2014, which revolve around characters trying to alter events in the past, only to realize that their actions are already part of the timeline they are attempting to change. In these stories, the characters' attempts to change history often lead to the very outcomes they were trying to prevent, creating a paradox in which the future is both the cause and the result of the past. Philosophers have long debated the nature of time and causality, with many seeing the predestination paradox as a way to explore the limits of human free will. The paradox forces us to confront questions about determinism and whether our choices are truly our own, or whether they are dictated by a pre-existing set of circumstances. The tension between free will and determinism is central to the predestination paradox, and it continues to challenge our understanding of the nature of time and the possibility of changing the future. The predestination paradox offers a fascinating insight into the nature of time and causality. In a world governed by closed, time-like curbs, events become self-referential, where actions in the future become the causes of actions in the past. This creates an inescapable loop, where it becomes impossible to determine whether events are the result of free will or predestination. Ultimately, the predestination paradox raises fundamental questions about free will and the nature of time. If time travel were possible, would we be able to change our destiny, or would our actions always be part of a predetermined sequence? The paradox suggests that the past and future are more closely connected than we might realize, and that even our choices may not be as free as we believe. Grandfather paradox. Imagine you have the ability to travel back in time to the moment before your grandfather was born. In this moment, you make a critical decision. You inadvertently prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, thus ensuring that your parents never meet, and ultimately, you are never born. If you were never born, How could you have traveled back in time in the first place to alter this event? This is the heart of the grandfather paradox, a mind-bending time travel dilemma that forces us to confront the contradictions of causality. If you can change the past, how does it affect the future? The paradox suggests that time travel may create a logical loop of events that would make your existence impossible, creating an irreconcilable contradiction. Can you change history without erasing yourself from existence? The grandfather paradox raises crucial questions about the nature of time, cause and effect, and the potential consequences of altering the past. Let's explore the grandfather paradox, where time travel and causality meet in a mind-bending loop that challenges our understanding of reality. The grandfather paradox is one of the most famous thought experiments in the philosophy of time travel, dating back to the 20th century. The paradox was first introduced by René Barjavel, a French writer, in his 1943 novel Le Voyageur Imprudent, The Imprudent Traveller. The paradox gained widespread attention in the 1960s, after physicist Kurt Gödel and others began exploring the implications of time travel in the context of general relativity and causality. The grandfather paradox is often cited in discussions about the logical consequences of time travel and how altering events in the past could lead to contradictory outcomes. If a time traveler were to go back and change an event that was crucial to their own existence, it creates a logical loop where the traveller could never have existed in the first place to make that change. Although the paradox was first articulated in science fiction, it has been studied in the fields of philosophy, physics, and metaphysics. The paradox has sparked debates about the possibility of time travel and whether time itself is fixed or mutable. It also raises important questions about the nature of causality and the rules that govern the universe. The grandfather paradox remains a cornerstone of discussions about time travel, causality, and the complexities of changing history. The grandfather paradox is a classic thought experiment in the study of time travel that explores the potential contradictions that arise when an individual attempts to change the past. The paradox is grounded in the fundamental principles of causality, which assert that events in the past lead to consequences in the future. However, the paradox arises when a time traveler alters an event in the past that is essential to their own existence, creating a logical loop or contradiction. Causality is the principle that every event, or cause, has a consequence that follows in time. In the context of time travel, causality assumes that the future is the inevitable result of the past. The grandfather paradox challenges this concept by suggesting that if you alter an event in the past, such as preventing your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, it could change the course of events in such a way that you would never be born. This introduces a contradiction. If you were never born, then you could not have travelled back in time in the first place to prevent the meeting of your grandfather and grandmother. The paradox lies in the fact that if you change the past in this way, it creates a logical loop where your very existence becomes impossible, but your attempt to change the past would have already taken place. Time travel is a concept that has fascinated philosophers, scientists, and writers for centuries. While time travel to the future is theoretically possible, according to Einstein's theory of relativity, time travel to the past presents significant logical paradoxes. If time travel were possible, it raises questions about the nature of time and the structure of the universe. In the case of the grandfather paradox, the crux of the issue is the assumption that changing the past could directly affect the future. This would imply that time is not linear or deterministic, but instead mutable, which creates a potential conflict between different timelines and the causal chain of events. The paradox highlights the difficulties in reconciling time travel with our understanding of cause and effect. Imagine a scenario where a person named Alex travels back in time to a moment before their grandfather was born. In this scenario, Alex prevents their grandfather from meeting their grandmother, thus ensuring that Alex's parents never meet, and ultimately Alex is never born. If Alex is never born, how could they have travelled back in time in the first place to alter the event? The logical contradiction arises because Alex's actions in the past undermine the possibility of their own existence, creating a paradox. The paradox is rooted in the idea that time is causal. If A causes B, then A must always precede B. However, if Alex changes event A, the meeting of the grandparents, it causes event B, Alex's birth, to no longer occur. This creates an inconsistent timeline, where Alex can neither exist to make the change nor not make the change, since the change would prevent their existence. The Bootstrap Paradox is closely related to the grandfather paradox. It refers to a situation where an object or piece of information exists without ever having been created. In the context of the grandfather paradox, the question arises, if Alex changes the past to prevent their birth, where did Alex come from to begin with? This creates a causal loop, where events in time are self-sorganating without a clear beginning or end. In the case of the grandfather paradox, the fact that Alex changes the past creates a loop that has no resolution. Alex's existence is dependent on the very event they are trying to prevent, which creates an infinite loop of events. This makes the grandfather paradox a powerful illustration of the difficulties in reconciling time travel with logical causality. One potential solution to the grandfather paradox is the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. According to this theory, when a time traveler alters an event in the past, they create a new parallel timeline or alternate reality, separate from the original one. In this scenario, Alex could travel back in time, prevent the meeting of their grandparents, and still exist in the original timeline as part of a separate world or parallel universe. In the many worlds framework, every time a choice is made that would alter the past, it splits the timeline, creating multiple realities in which different outcomes occur. This would eliminate the contradiction by suggesting that the past has been altered, but the original timeline remains unchanged. As a result, Alex could travel back in time, make the change, and still exist in a new timeline where the event occurs differently. Another possible resolution to the grandfather paradox is the Novikov self-consistency principle, which posits that events in the past are self-consistent and cannot be altered in such a way as to create a contradiction. According to this principle, even if time travel to the past were possible, the laws of physics would prevent any actions that would create logical inconsistencies. In other words, if Alex were to travel back in time to prevent their grandfather from meeting their grandmother, something would occur to prevent Alex from carrying out that action. Perhaps they would be stopped, or events would unfold in such a way that the meeting still happens. This principle suggests that while time travel to the past might be theoretically possible, the timeline would adjust itself to ensure that no paradoxes occur. Essentially, time would correct itself to maintain causal consistency, making it impossible for Alex to change history in a way that would prevent their own existence. A closed time-like curve, CTC, is another theoretical concept that might resolve the grandfather paradox. ACTC refers to a loop in space-time that allows an object to travel through time and return to its starting point. In ACTC, the past and future are interwoven and events can occur in a self-consistent manner. For example, in a CTC, Alex could go back in time, alter events, and still exist, because the timeline would loop around in such a way that the actions Alex takes do not disrupt their own existence. CTCs are consistent with the general theory of relativity, which allows for the possibility of closed loops in space-time. However, the existence of CTCs has not been proven, and they remain a theoretical concept in the realm of space-time and quantum mechanics. The grandfather paradox raises fundamental questions about the nature of time. Is time a fixed, linear sequence of events, or is it mutable and subject to change? If time is fixed, then any attempt to alter the past would be impossible or self-correcting. This would align with the Novikov principle, or the many worlds interpretation. However, if time is mutable, it might allow for infinite timelines or the possibility of changing history, leading to paradoxes like the grandfather paradox. The paradox invites us to reconsider how we perceive the relationship between past, present, and future, and how time travel could fit into this framework. Ultimately, the grandfather paradox challenges our basic assumptions about the flow of time, causality, and the possibility of altering history. Polchinski's paradox. Imagine a future where time travel is possible. Now, envision a situation where a person travels back in time and causes a chain of events that contradicts their own existence, a paradox that seems to defy the very laws of logic. This is the Polchinski's paradox, a thought experiment proposed by theoretical physicist Joseph Polchinski in 1991. The paradox arises in the realm of time travel and quantum mechanics, particularly when considering how particles or objects could interact with their past selves. In the paradox, a particle is sent back in time to interfere with its own history, leading to a situation where the causal chain breaks down. The question is, how can a particle influence its own past without creating a logical contradiction. The paradox plays with the concept of closed time-like curves, CTCs, where time loops back on itself, creating a causal loop. The Polchinski paradox forces us to reconsider the very nature of causality and time. Can events in the past really be altered without violating the consistency of the timeline? Let's explore the Polchinski paradox, where quantum mechanics, time travel, and causality collide in an intriguing, mind-bending twist. Polchinski's paradox emerged in the early 1000s, 990s, from the exploration of time travel and its possible implications in quantum mechanics. The paradox is named after theoretical physicist Joseph Polchinski, who introduced it in his 1991 paper titled The Arrow of Time and the Second Law of Thermodynamics. In this paper, Polchinski proposed a thought experiment that involved a closed time-like curve, CTCA, theoretical path in spacetime, that loops back on itself, allowing an object to travel back in time and interact with its own history. The paradox arose when Polchinski examined the consequences of sending a particle back in time to interact with its own past. Specifically, he suggested that if the particle were to interfere with its own history, such as by altering its trajectory or causing a collision, it could lead to a logical contradiction. In essence, the particle would create a situation where it could not have existed in the first place, because its interaction with the past would prevent it from traveling back in time. This creates a causal loop, which challenges our fundamental understanding of causality and time. Polchinski's paradox was developed within the framework of quantum mechanics, which allows for the existence of closed time-like curves and the possibility of time travel. The paradox challenges the notion that time and causality are always linear, proposing instead that time might be subject to strange, self-consistent loops that break traditional rules of cause and effect. Polchinski's paradox became a crucial element in discussions about time travel, quantum physics, and the nature of causality, particularly in the context of whether time travel is logically possible without creating contradictions in the timeline. The Polchinski paradox is a fascinating and intricate concept in theoretical physics, combining elements of time travel, quantum mechanics, and causality. The paradox illustrates the challenges and potential contradictions that arise when particles or objects interact with their own past in a universe that allows for closed time-like curves, CTCs. To understand the paradox, we must explore the concepts of time travel, causal loops, and the quantum nature of particles. 1. The concept of closed time-like curves, CTC. Closed time-like curves, CTCs, are hypothetical paths in spacetime that loop back on themselves, allowing an object to return to its own past. The concept of CTCs arises from Einstein's theory of general relativity, which suggests that the fabric of spacetime can be curved by the presence of mass and energy. Under certain conditions, this curvature can create loops in time, where an object can travel back to its own earlier position in the timeline. In theory, CTCs are a possible feature of space-time geometry, particularly in regions where gravitational fields are extremely strong, such as near rotating black holes or in the presence of wormholes. The idea of CTCs suggests that time might not be as linear and one-directional as we commonly perceive it. Instead, time could, in certain circumstances, loop back on itself, allowing for the possibility of time travel. However, the existence of CTCs raises profound paradoxes about the nature of causality. The principle that cause must precede effect. The Polchinski paradox is a direct consequence of trying to understand how closed time-like curves might affect the relationship between cause and effect in the context of quantum mechanics. B. Time travel and causal consistency. If an object or particle could travel back in time via a CTC, it could potentially interfere with or alter events in its own past. This leads to the problem of causal consistency. How can a particle interact with its past without creating a contradiction in the timeline? For example, if a time traveler goes back and prevents their own birth or existence, how could they have traveled back in time in the first place? The Polchinski paradox arises when we consider quantum particles within the context of CTCs. If a particle is sent back in time to interact with its own past, it could potentially cause a self-consistent loop in which the particle both exists and does not exist at the same time. This creates a logical contradiction that challenges our understanding of causality and the nature of time. 2. Polchinski's thought experiment. The particle and its own past. A. The particle and the past. Polchinski's paradox centers around the idea of a particle traveling back in time along a closed, time-like curve. In his thought experiment, Polchinski imagines a scenario where a particle is sent back in time to interact with its own past trajectory. The question is, can the particle affect its own past without causing a contradiction? For example, imagine a particle that travels back in time and interferes with its own motion, perhaps by colliding with an object in its past that causes a shift in its trajectory. This would change the particle's path in such a way that it could no longer follow the trajectory that would allow it to travel back in time in the first place. In other words, the particle's very existence in the past would prevent it from ever returning to the future. This creates a causal loop in which the particle's actions in the past both create and prevent its existence. The paradox lies in the fact that the particle cannot both affect its past and exist at the same time. Its influence on the past directly contradicts the possibility of its own future existence. This creates a logical contradiction that undermines the consistency of the timeline. B. The self-consistency principle. To address the Polchinski paradox, some theorists have proposed the self-consistency principle, which states that any time travel event that would lead to a logical contradiction or paradox is simply impossible. In this view, the universe has an inherent mechanism to prevent self-contradictory actions in the timeline. For example, if a time traveler tried to prevent their own birth, the universe would prevent the traveler from taking any actions that would lead to their own non-existence. In this sense, the Polchinski paradox could be seen as a thought experiment that highlights the challenges of causal loops and the potential limitations of time travel in any universe that respects causal consistency. 3. Quantum mechanics and time travel. A. Quantum mechanics and particle behavior. The Polchinski paradox is deeply rooted in quantum mechanics, which describes the behavior of particles on a very small scale. In quantum mechanics, particles do not follow deterministic paths like those in classical physics. Instead, their behavior is described by probability waves and uncertainty. This means that a particle may not have a single, definitive position in time and space, but rather exists as a superposition of multiple possibilities until measured. In the context of time travel, quantum mechanics introduces the concept of quantum entanglement, where particles that are entangled share information instantaneously, even if they are separated by vast distances. If particles could travel back in time and interact with their own past selves, this could create quantum paradoxes, where the past and future states of the particle are entangled in a way that defies conventional understanding. B. The role of the observer. Another element of quantum mechanics that plays into the Polchinski paradox is the role of the observer. According to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, a particle's state, position, momentum, etc., is not determined until it is observed or measured. This suggests that time travel to the past could involve the collapse of the particle's wave function, leading to an interaction between the particle and its past state. The paradox then becomes, if the particle's behavior is dependent on observation and measurement, how can the past be altered without contradicting the current reality? Would a time traveler's actions in the past change the course of events, or would the universe have a mechanism to ensure the consistency of history? 4. Possible resolutions to the Polchinski paradox. A. Novikov self-consistency principle 1. Possible. Self-consistency principle 1. Resolution to the Polchinski paradox is the Novikov self-consistency principle, which posits that the laws of physics prevent any time travel events that would lead to contradictions or paradoxes. According to this principle, if a time traveler attempts to affect their past in a way that would create a logical inconsistency, the universe would prevent them from doing so. This would ensure that causal consistency is preserved and no self-contradictory actions could take place. B. Quantum mechanics and many worlds interpretation. Another potential solution comes from the many worlds interpretation, MWI, of quantum mechanics. According to MWI, every quantum event creates a branching of reality where different outcomes exist in parallel universes. In this framework, the Polchinski paradox could be resolved by suggesting that when a particle travels back in time and interacts with its past, it creates a new timeline or parallel universe. In this way, the causal loop is avoided and the timeline remains consistent, but multiple realities can exist simultaneously. Consistent history's approach, a third potential resolution, comes from the consistent history's approach in quantum mechanics, which attempts to describe quantum systems without relying on the idea of wave function collapse. In this view, the past and future are constrained by probabilistic rules, and a self-consistent history is one that adheres to those rules. The paradox may then be resolved by maintaining consistency in the probabilistic structure of the timeline, preventing contradictory actions. Hitler's murder paradox. Imagine a world where a single action, like the assassination of a notorious historical figure, could completely reshape the course of history. The Hitler's murder paradox forces us to grapple with a profound moral and philosophical dilemma. What if the murder of Adolf Hitler had succeeded in altering the course of World War II? Would his death have prevented the war? Or could it have led to even worse consequences? While the idea of eliminating a tyrant responsible for atrocities seems morally justifiable, the paradox arises when we consider that killing Hitler might have inadvertently led to even greater suffering. The complexities of history, cause and effect, and human behavior suggest that removing one individual from a given point in time doesn't always lead to the expected or desirable outcome. What would have been the true cost of a world without Hitler, particularly if someone else rose to power with potentially more destructive consequences? The Hitler's murder paradox challenges us to question whether we can ever truly predict the long-term consequences of violent actions, even when those actions are intended to prevent evil. Let's explore this paradox where history, ethics, and the unforeseen consequences of actions intertwine. The Hitler's murder paradox stems from the many attempts made during World War II to assassinate Adolf Hitler, the dictator responsible for launching the war and orchestrating the Holocaust. Over the years, there have been numerous plots to kill Hitler, with perhaps the most famous being the 1944 assassination attempt, led by German army officer Klaus von Stauffenberg and other conspirators. The plot, known as the July 20 plot, failed and Hitler survived. But the idea of what would have happened had the assassination succeeded lingered in public and academic discourse. The paradox becomes apparent when we consider the moral implications of such an act. Killing Hitler may have been a moral imperative to prevent the deaths of millions and end the war early, but history shows that assassination, while achieving a short-term goal, can have unpredictable long-term consequences. The idea that removing one individual could have brought peace and stability to Europe is tempting, but history suggests that the power vacuum left by Hitler's death could have resulted in even greater chaos, with other figures or factions rising to power and continuing the war, or even intensifying its horrors. In the wake of the failure of assassination attempts, historians have debated whether Hitler's death would have truly been the solution to World War II's destruction, or if it would have led to an even more catastrophic war. The paradox challenges us to understand the complexity of historical causality and question how we can ever predict the consequences of removing a key figure from history. The Hitler's murder paradox invites us to explore the complexities of historical causality, morality, and the unpredictability of outcomes in the context of significant actions. The paradox arises from the fact that while killing Hitler seems like a morally justified action to stop his atrocities, the long-term consequences of such an action are unclear and may have worsened the situation. It highlights the difficulty of predicting outcomes in complex historical events and the often contradictory nature of intervening in history. 1. The attempt to remove a dictator, morality, versus consequences. A. The case for assassination. The argument for assassinating Hitler is rooted in the idea of preventing greater harm. Hitler's reign brought about one of the deadliest wars in human history, with an estimated 60 million people losing their lives, including the systematic murder of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. Given this devastating impact, it seems morally justifiable to consider killing Hitler as a necessary act to end the war and stop the genocide. By killing Hitler, the immediate consequences would likely include the collapse of the Nazi regime and potentially the end of World War II before it escalated further. The paradox, however, lies in the assumption that the removal of Hitler would result in a positive outcome, especially since World War II was a global conflict involving many other players with competing interests. Simply removing one dictator may not have stopped the political machinery of fascism from continuing or even growing more powerful. B. The limits of predictability. The Hitler's murder paradox emphasizes the challenge of predicting the long-term consequences of even the most well-intentioned actions. While eliminating Hitler could have potentially shortened the war and saved millions of lives, it's also possible that his absence would have created a power vacuum that led to different or even more dangerous outcomes. For example, if Hitler had been assassinated early in the war, the resulting political chaos could have made room for a more radical or unstable leader to rise to power. Nazi ideology was not entirely dependent on Hitler himself, but rather on a vast and loyal network of officers, military leaders and political figures who might have continued the war effort with equal intensity. In fact, figures like Heinrich Himmler, Joseph Goebbels or Erwin Rommel might have taken control of the regime, and some could have been even more ruthless or capable in executing the Nazi agenda. The paradox lies in the unpredictability of history. Removing a key figure might not have solved the problem, but could have instead led to a more dangerous regime or a prolonged war. 2. The impact of power vacuums in history. A. The rise of other leaders. History shows us that when a powerful leader is removed, it often leads to the rise of others who may be just as or even more extreme in their beliefs. Stalin's assassination of Trotsky, for instance, led to a more authoritarian regime, whereas the fall of Mussolini did not end fascism in Italy, as subsequent leaders maintained similar ideologies. In the case of the Hitler's murder paradox, his death could have resulted in a leadership struggle within the Nazi Party, potentially leading to a fragmented or more militaristic state. The military factions within Germany, such as the SS and the Wehrmacht, could have competed for power, leading to a prolonged civil conflict or even greater violence. A more radical figure, perhaps someone less concerned with public relations or diplomatic negotiation, could have escalated the war rather than ending it. The paradox arises from the uncertainty of who might have filled the power vacuum left by Hitler's assassination. The moral justification for killing Hitler assumes that his death would have led to peace, but history shows that power vacuums often lead to more violent struggles rather than peaceful resolutions. The continuation of the Nazi ideology, even without Hitler at the helm, the core Nazi ideology, focused on Aryan superiority, anti-Semitism and militarism, would likely have persisted. The Nazi Party apparatus had deeply embedded itself in German society, and it is unlikely that the loss of one individual would have eliminated these ideological drivers of the war. Leaders who succeeded Hitler could have continued the racial policies of the regime, especially if they were similarly motivated by anti-Semitic beliefs. The Holocaust may have continued under different leadership, potentially with a different focus or scope, leading to even greater devastation. It's also possible that without Hitler's charismatic leadership, the Nazi regime might have become more authoritarian under a military dictatorship, leading to more extreme policies and fewer attempts at diplomatic solutions. 3. The moral dilemma of intervening in history. A. Ethical considerations of assassination. The Hitler's murder paradox also brings up important ethical questions about the morality of intervening in history by assassinating a leader, even if that leader is responsible for atrocities. Killing Hitler would have likely saved millions of lives, but the act of assassination, no matter how justified it may seem, raises significant moral concerns. Is it ethical to take the life of an individual, even one responsible for immense suffering, in order to change the course of history? Would the assassination of a political leader make one an accomplice to the potential harm caused by the resulting instability? The paradox suggests that even when an action seems to be morally justified, killing a tyrant, its broader consequences may raise serious ethical questions about the price of violence and intervention in shaping history. B. The problem of alternate histories. The paradox also draws attention to the philosophical and historical limitations of trying to alter history. Even if Hitler had been assassinated, it's impossible to fully predict how the course of history would have unfolded afterward. Would the war have ended sooner, or would a more dangerous political figure have risen to power? Would the atrocities of the Holocaust have been averted, or would they have been carried out in a different form under a new regime? The Hitler's murder paradox underscores the complexity of altering history, the unintended consequences of a seemingly moral decision, and the question of whether changing one event could really bring about the desired outcomes. The paradox challenges the belief that murder or violent intervention is the most effective way to create a better world, suggesting that the consequences of such actions may be as unpredictable and dangerous as the evil they seek to eradicate. 4. Conclusion. Rethinking the interplay between history, ethics and consequences, the Hitler's murder paradox forces us to consider the unpredictability of historical events and the ethical complexity of attempting to intervene in the course of history. While assassinating Hitler might seem like a straightforward and morally righteous action, the paradox reveals that the consequences of such an action are uncertain and could lead to even greater suffering. The paradox forces us to confront the limits of our ability to predict the outcomes of our actions, especially when those actions involve violence or historical intervention. History is shaped by a web of complex factors, and changing one element, no matter how justified, may lead to unforeseen consequences. Ultimately, the Hitler's murder paradox reminds us that violence in pursuit of justice may carry unintended risks, making it difficult to fully control or predict the long-term outcomes. Bracketing paradox. Imagine that you are faced with a moral dilemma. You must choose between two actions, one that will benefit society but harm a few individuals, and another that will cause minimal harm but lead to broader societal consequences. How do you make the right decision? The bracketing paradox explores the tension between ethical decision-making and logical constraints. In many real-world scenarios, individuals or organizations are forced to make decisions under strict constraints or conditions that prevent them from acting in the way they would consider morally ideal. The paradox arises when the need to follow external rules, such as laws, policies, or logical reasoning frameworks, conflicts with the moral or ethical decisions that would normally be made. How can one reconcile following rigid frameworks with acting in a way that aligns with personal or societal ethical standards? Can logical structures and moral imperatives coexist without causing contradictions? The bracketing paradox forces us to confront the inherent limitations of ethical reasoning within confined or predefined systems, revealing the tension between ideal ethics and logical constraints. Let's explore the bracketing paradox, where decision-making, logic, and ethics intersect in a challenging and often paradoxical way. The bracketing paradox comes from the philosophical and logical exploration of decision-making processes within constrained systems. In its simplest form, it arises when a person or organization faces a moral or ethical dilemma, but is constrained by external rules, frameworks, or logical boundaries that shape how decisions are made. While ethical decision-making allows for moral flexibility and individual autonomy, decision-making within a logical framework requires strict adherence to rules and constraints that may contradict ethical intentions. This paradox has its roots in the study of ethics and philosophy of action, where many moral dilemmas present a conflict between rules and ethics. For example, in a utilitarian framework, one might be required to act in a way that maximizes the overall good, even if it means sacrificing the individual. This runs into conflict when considering individual rights and human dignity, creating a tension that is explored in the bracketing paradox. The term itself is often associated with ethical decision-making in constrained environments, such as in business, political systems, or legal frameworks, where individuals are forced to bracket their moral considerations to meet the requirements of external obligations or rules. Philosophers and ethicists have long debated how to reconcile logic with moral imperatives, with some suggesting that these external constraints may limit human freedom or result in compromised ethical judgments. The bracketing paradox continues to be relevant in modern debates about ethical frameworks in fields like artificial intelligence, legal ethics, and policy-making. The bracketing paradox emerges in decision-making processes that require individuals or organizations to act within predefined constraints, whether those constraints are legal, ethical, or logical in nature. In these situations, ethical considerations may conflict with the rules governing decision-making, creating a moral tension where the ideal ethical decision seems to be at odds with the decision required by external systems. 1. Ethical decision-making and constraints. A. Ethical dilemmas and moral reasoning. Ethical decision-making often involves choosing between two or more actions that lead to different outcomes, each with its own set of moral consequences. For example, the famous trolley problem asks individuals to decide whether to pull a lever to divert a runaway trolley onto a track where it will kill one person to save 5 others. Here, individuals must navigate the tension between utilitarian ethics, which promotes the greatest good for the greatest number, and deontological ethics, which emphasizes the importance of individual rights and moral rules. In situations like this, there is no perfect solution. Instead, people must make decisions based on their moral frameworks, which can be personal or culturally determined. The bracketing paradox arises when an individual is forced to choose between ideal ethical decisions, those that align with their personal moral compass, and logical constraints, those that are imposed by rules, systems, or frameworks outside their control. B. External constraints, rules and systems. External constraints in decision-making can come from a variety of sources. These may include legal frameworks, laws that dictate what actions are permissible or required, institutional rules, policies or procedures set by organizations or authorities, logical frameworks, rules of logic or reason that define how decisions must be made, regardless of ethical considerations, social norms, cultural or societal expectations that influence how decisions should be made. These constraints often require individuals to act in ways that might not align with their moral beliefs. For example, a doctor may feel ethically obliged to provide care to a patient, but if hospital policy or insurance rules prevent this, the doctor must bracket their moral obligation to comply with external systems. 2. The conflict between ethics and logic. A. The role of logic in decision-making. In the context of the bracketing paradox, logic refers to the predefined rules that structure how decisions should be made. This could involve legal reasoning, rational analysis, or following standardized procedures that prioritize consistency and predictability. For example, in the context of artificial intelligence, machines are programmed to make decisions based on logical algorithms. These systems operate on if-then rules and algorithms that do not take moral considerations into account. A self-driving car may be programmed to prioritize the safety of its passengers above all else, but this could lead to a situation where the car is forced to make a decision that harms pedestrians or other drivers. This creates a conflict between the moral implications of saving lives and the logical imperative to maximize safety for the car's occupants. The bracketing paradox occurs when a person or system must choose between following logical frameworks, which may not align with ethical ideals, and ethical considerations, which may violate logical or rule-based constraints. B. The consequences of prioritizing logic over ethics. When logic is prioritized over ethics, it can lead to decisions that are technically correct, but morally problematic. For example, consider a corporate executive who follows the rules of a company's financial reporting system, but, in doing so, overlooks the harm done to workers or the environment. While the decision may adhere to the logic of profit maximization and cost reduction, it could have detrimental effects on the well-being of employees or communities. Similarly, in a legal system, a judge might be required to sentence a person according to the law, even if they believe the person deserves mercy or rehabilitation. This strict adherence to legal logic can result in outcomes that feel unjust or morally wrong. In such cases, the bracketing paradox arises because the decision maker feels compelled to act within the constraints of the system, even though they may feel that their actions conflict with their ethical principles. 3. The ethics of bracketing. Navigating moral constraints. A. The principle of moral integrity. One approach to addressing the bracketing paradox is to emphasize the importance of moral integrity. This involves maintaining consistency between one's actions and moral beliefs, even when faced with external constraints. For instance, a whistleblower might expose wrongdoing within an organization, despite the risk of retribution or legal consequences, choosing to act in alignment with ethical principles rather than comply with the institutional rules that encourage unethical behavior. In situations where external constraints are rigid, individuals may be forced to make difficult choices that prioritize their moral integrity over the logical rules. This kind of decision-making involves making ethical compromises or risking personal consequences in order to stay true to one's values. B. Navigating compromise and conflict. While some situations demand a clear ethical stance, many involve complex moral compromises. The bracketing paradox asks whether it is possible to maintain moral integrity when bound by a system of rules that may not allow for ethical flexibility. In the example of the doctor constrained by insurance rules, the doctor must choose whether to follow institutional guidelines or find ways to make ethical decisions within those boundaries. The paradox also extends to systems where the rules themselves may be flawed. In such cases, individuals may be faced with a choice between adhering to a flawed logic or finding ways to restructure the rules to align with ethical values. This dilemma challenges decision-makers to find creative solutions to balance external constraints with moral considerations. 4. Broader implications of the bracketing paradox. A. Ethics in artificial intelligence and technology. The bracketing paradox is especially relevant in discussions of artificial intelligence and autonomous systems. AI systems are designed to operate according to logical frameworks. They follow rules and make decisions based on data and algorithms. However, these systems often do not consider ethical nuances in their decision-making, which can lead to decisions that, while logically sound, may not align with human ethical standards. This paradox raises important questions about how to create ethically aligned AI that balances logical decision-making with moral considerations. As AI systems become more integrated into sectors such as healthcare, transportation, and law enforcement, the challenge of ethical programming will become more pressing, especially when these systems are forced to make life and death decisions. Be it the role of institutions and governance in political and legal systems, the bracketing paradox plays out when institutions or governments enforce policies that may conflict with moral ideals. For example, a government might impose austerity measures that harm vulnerable populations, justifying these actions through economic logic. Citizens and policymakers must decide whether to accept these rules or challenge them to better reflect ethical values. Institutions must grapple with the balance between upholding laws and adhering to ethical standards. Legal scholars and ethicists often debate whether institutions should be more flexible in accommodating ethical principles, or whether they should strictly adhere to legal logic to ensure predictability and fairness. 5. Conclusion. Embracing the bracketing paradox. A. The importance of flexibility and innovation. The bracketing paradox invites us to reconsider how we navigate the tension between logic and ethics in decision-making. In many cases, external constraints can limit our ability to make the most ethical decision, but there are opportunities for creative problem-solving within those constraints. Embracing the paradox means recognizing that while ethical ideals are important, we must also be aware of the limitations imposed by rules and systems. B. Reconciling logic and morality. Ultimately, the bracketing paradox encourages us to find ways to reconcile logic and morality by understanding that ethical decisions are not always black and white, and that navigating complex moral dilemmas often requires flexibility, compromise, and, in some cases, a willingness to challenge established systems. Codes talk a paradox. Imagine a group of individuals using a code so effective that it confounds even the most advanced enemy forces. These individuals are tasked with transmitting critical information under the constant threat of interception, yet their secret remains impenetrable, not because the code is complex, but because the enemy simply does not understand the language they are using. This is the code talker paradox, a phenomenon where the language itself, though seemingly unremarkable, becomes a tool of unbreakable secrecy. The paradox lies in the power of language, which, when coupled with cultural identity and context, can become an insurmountable barrier to those attempting to decipher it. The Navajo code talkers of World War II provide a prime example. By using their native language, which was completely unintelligible to the enemy, they were able to pass messages without the need for encryption or complex ciphers. How can a language with no inherent secrecy be used to safeguard the most vital military communications? The paradox forces us to consider how language, an aspect of human identity, can transcend its primary purpose as a means of communication and become an effective weapon in its own right. Let's explore the code talker paradox, where language, culture, and secrecy intersect in unexpected ways. The code talker paradox became a prominent subject during World War II, when the United States sought ways to protect military communications from enemy interception. The Navajo code talkers, a group of Native American soldiers, became famous for using their native language as a code to transmit military messages. The Navajo language, which was complex, highly contextual, and unwritten, was chosen precisely because it was unfamiliar to the enemy, and its unique syntax and structure made it nearly impossible for non-native speakers to understand. During the war, the Japanese military, which had advanced cryptographic capabilities, was unable to crack the Navajo code, despite numerous attempts. The code talkers transmitted essential messages in their native language, using the phonetic alphabet to represent military terms, and their messages remained secure throughout the war. This paradoxical situation raised a fascinating question. How can a language, one that is not designed for secrecy, be used as an impenetrable code? The success of the Navajo code talkers is one of the most well-known examples of the code talker paradox. But there are other instances throughout history where the use of a seemingly ordinary or everyday language became a tool of secrecy and deception in times of war. The paradox underscores the inherent power of language and identity, as well as the ways in which cultural context can be leveraged to protect critical information. The Code Talker paradox highlights the fascinating intersection of language, culture, and secrecy. While language is traditionally used as a tool for communication, it can also serve as a means of hiding or concealing information, making it an unintentional code in certain contexts. The paradox lies in the fact that a language that is not meant for secrecy, such as the Navajo language, can become an impenetrable barrier to those who seek to decode it. This paradox raises interesting questions about how identity, cultural heritage, and language use can create unexpected forms of protection in critical situations, such as warfare. 1. Language as code, the intricacies of linguistic secrecy. A. The nature of code. A code is typically a system of symbols, sounds, or words that is used to convey a message in a form that is difficult for unauthorized parties to understand. In modern cryptography, codes are often based on mathematical algorithms and complex encryption techniques that transform messages into an incomprehensible form. Traditional codes are designed to hide the original message from those who do not possess the key or knowledge to decode it. The Code Talker paradox challenges the notion that a language must be complex or artificially constructed to function as a secure form of communication. Unlike cryptographic systems, which rely on mathematical transformations, the Navajo code relied on a natural language, one that had no inherent connection to the secrecy of the messages being conveyed. The Navajo language itself was not designed to be a code. It was simply the everyday means of communication for the Navajo people. Yet, in the context of World War II, it became a highly effective code, primarily because it was unfamiliar to the enemy and difficult to learn in a short amount of time. This presents a paradox. How can a natural, everyday language be used as a tool for secrecy? The answer lies in the inherent complexity and cultural context of the Navajo language, which was not only foreign to the enemy but also impossible for non-native speakers to understand, even if they had access to it. B. The structure of Navajo and its use as a code. The Navajo language is intrinsically complex, with a unique structure that includes numerous verb forms and cultural references. For example, many words in Navajo are built upon root words that change depending on context. A single word can have multiple meanings based on its placement in a sentence, making it incredibly difficult for outsiders to decode. Moreover, the Navajo alphabet does not follow the phonetic structure of most Western languages, making it even more difficult to understand for those not familiar with the language. To use the Navajo language as a code, the Code Talkers developed a system in which specific Navajo words represented military terms. For example, the word for turtle in Navajo was used to represent a tank, and the word for chicken hawk was used to represent a fighter plane. The use of these seemingly ordinary words as military terms allowed the Code Talkers to communicate securely, as the enemy would have no way of understanding the meaning without a key to the code. The paradox arises from the fact that the Navajo language was not designed to serve as a code, yet it was used effectively as one during the war. This demonstrates the power of language itself as a tool for secrecy, not because it was intentionally constructed to hide information, but because it was inaccessible to those who did not understand the cultural and linguistic context. 2. Cultural identity and the power of language. A. Language as a cultural marker. Language is not only a tool for communication but also a key element of cultural identity. The Navajo language is deeply tied to the history, traditions, and spiritual beliefs of the Navajo people. For the Code Talkers, the use of their native language in war was not just a matter of military strategy, it was also an act of cultural preservation. By using their language to protect military secrets, the Code Talkers played a role in safeguarding not only national security but also the cultural heritage of the Navajo people. The Code Talker paradox thus highlights the role of language as a cultural tool that goes beyond mere communication. It suggests that language, when combined with cultural identity and context, can be a powerful weapon for secrecy. In this case, the Navajo language was not just a method of speaking, it was a way of asserting cultural autonomy and protecting their community, even in the midst of war. B. The role of cultural context in secrecy. The Navajo Code Talkers were able to use their language as a code precisely because the language was so tightly connected to their cultural context. The Navajo people shared a unique social structure and worldview that informed how they understood their language and its meanings. The enemy, on the other hand, had no familiarity with this context, which made the codes so effective. This aspect of the code talker paradox underscores the importance of cultural context in determining the effectiveness of a code. It also suggests that language can be more than a tool for communication. It can become a tool of resilience and protection when it is tied to a community's identity and values. 3. Secrecy in war and the role of the code talker. A. The importance of secrecy in warfare. In war, the ability to communicate securely is paramount. Codes have been used throughout history to keep military strategies, troop movements, and other critical information from the enemy. The success of the code talkers demonstrates the importance of secure communication in maintaining the upper hand in battle. The paradox lies in the fact that the Navajo code, while not designed for secrecy, became one of the most unbreakable codes in military history. The psychological impact of language as secrecy. The psychological aspect of the code talker paradox is also significant. The Navajo code talkers played an integral role in the psychological warfare of World War II. The Japanese forces, unable to decipher the code, were left uncertain about the intentions of the American military, which created a strategic advantage. The use of a language that was not inherently secret created a psychological fog of war for the enemy, which in turn increased the effectiveness of American operations. C. A symbol of resistance and cultural pride. Finally, the Navajo code talkers were not just military heroes, they were symbols of resistance and cultural pride. By using their native language to contribute to the Allied victory, they not only protected their own people, but also proved the resilience and strength of the Navajo culture. The paradox is that the very language used to protect military secrets also became a means of preserving cultural identity in the face of war. 4. Broader implications of the code talker paradox. A. Language as a tool of power. The code talker paradox reveals the potential of language as a tool of power. Language, when tied to cultural identity and context, can transcend its ordinary role as a means of communication and become a formidable weapon of secrecy. This has broader implications for how we think about identity, secrecy, and security in both war and peace. B. Lessons for modern security and encryption. In the digital age, the idea of using natural language as a code may seem outdated, but the principle of using cultural and contextual barriers for security remains relevant. Today, cybersecurity experts often use cultural and contextual knowledge to craft security measures that protect sensitive data. The code talker paradox reminds us that security is not just about complex encryption, it's about understanding the context and identity of those involved. Moravec's paradox. Imagine a world where artificial intelligence, AI, is capable of performing highly complex tasks like diagnosing diseases, playing strategic games, or driving a car. Yet, when it comes to the simplest of human activities, such as walking, recognizing faces, or picking up a pencil, machines still struggle to match human capabilities. This is at the heart of Moravec's paradox, the idea that high-level reasoning, which humans often consider complex, is relatively easy for machines to replicate, but tasks that seem simple to humans are incredibly difficult for computers. Why is it that AI excels at tasks like chess or data analysis, but has difficulty performing activities that require basic sensorimotor skills or perceptual judgments? The paradox forces us to rethink our understanding of both human cognition and machine intelligence. It suggests that the intuitive and unconscious abilities humans take for granted, developed through millions of years of evolution, are far more complex than we realize, while the more abstract reasoning that machines excel at is often learned through structured and logical programming. Let's explore Moravec's paradox, where AI and human abilities clash, revealing surprising insights into the nature of intelligence and cognition. Moravec's paradox was first proposed by roboticist Hans Moravec in the 1980s, a leading figure in the field of artificial intelligence and robotics. Moravec's research into machine intelligence led him to a profound realization. While machines can outperform humans in complex tasks, such as playing chess, solving mathematical problems, and processing large volumes of data, they perform poorly at tasks humans consider basic, such as walking, recognizing objects, and navigating through a room. Moravec's observation was framed within the context of AI research, where early breakthroughs focused on programming machines to replicate human reasoning in fields like games, mathematics, and data processing. However, these accomplishments seemed trivial compared to the everyday feats of human cognition and sensory motor skills. Moravec famously wrote in his 1988 book Mind Children that the abilities humans take for granted, such as facial recognition and fine motor skills, are deeply complex, and evolutionary processes have honed them for millions of years. In contrast, tasks that humans consider intellectually demanding, such as solving problems or making abstract decisions, require much less inherent biological complexity. The paradox has since become a cornerstone concept in the study of artificial intelligence and robotics, highlighting the disconnect between cognitive abilities in machines and the biological prowess of human beings in perceptual and sensory motor tasks. It also prompts important questions about what constitutes intelligence, and whether machines can ever replicate the fluidity and intuition that humans demonstrate in day-to-day life. Moravec's paradox is an insightful reflection on the relationship between human cognition and the development of artificial intelligence. It points out a critical contradiction in AI development. While machines can handle complex, abstract tasks with ease, they struggle with basic tasks that require physical interaction with the world and perceptual reasoning. To understand the paradox, we need to dive deeper into several key aspects of intelligence, evolution, and machine learning. 1. Human cognition. Complexity in simplicity. Evolutionary development of human abilities. The paradox arises from the fact that tasks which seem simple to humans, such as walking, driving, or recognizing faces, actually require extraordinarily complex processes. These abilities have been shaped and refined by evolutionary forces over millions of years. The human brain has developed intricate neural networks that allow us to process sensory information, make split-second decisions, and carry out coordinated actions with astonishing fluidity. For example, walking involves a highly complex sequence of motions, coordination between multiple muscles, and real-time adjustments based on the surrounding environment. The fact that humans perform this task unconsciously and with ease masks the complexity involved. Humans take these skills for granted, but replicating them in machines requires extensive algorithms, sensors, and mechanical components. Similarly, face recognition involves the brain processing visual stimuli with incredible accuracy. Despite the many variations in lighting, angle, and expression, the brain automatically identifies faces, utilizing pattern recognition and memory in a way that is difficult for machines to replicate. B. Intuition versus rationality. Humans are deeply skilled at intuition, a form of reasoning based on experience, pattern recognition, and subconscious processes. This intuitive cognition allows us to navigate our environment, make split-second decisions, and act in ways that seem effortless. However, this intuitive processing is based on the accumulated knowledge and complex neural architecture that has been honed through evolution. Machines, on the other hand, are trained to solve problems in a structured, logical manner. They excel at abstract reasoning, where all the rules and conditions are laid out explicitly, such as in chess or mathematical problems. The lack of intuition in machines is a major challenge in creating AI systems that can mimic human behavior and thought processes in real time, without relying on large data sets and explicit instruction. 2. AI and high-level reasoning. A. Success in abstract tasks. Artificial intelligence has made impressive strides in tasks that require abstract reasoning, such as playing strategic games, analyzing complex datasets, and performing logical deductions. Machine learning algorithms are designed to process vast amounts of data, identify patterns, and make predictions based on those patterns. In structured tasks, such as solving mathematical problems or diagnosing diseases from medical data, AI often outperforms humans, who rely on intuition and experience. AI's success in high-level cognitive tasks can be attributed to its ability to perform massive parallel processing and to its reliance on pre-programmed rules or training data. For instance, the famous AI program Deep Blue defeated the world chess champion Garry Kasparov in 1997 by analyzing all possible chess moves in an incredibly short amount of time. Deep Blue had the capacity to examine and calculate millions of positions per second, something that would be impossible for a human mind. Similarly, AI can be trained to identify patterns in large datasets, making it a valuable tool in fields like data analytics, finance, medical diagnostics, and computer vision. Tasks that require logical, structured processing are well suited to machine learning algorithms, which can use predefined rules and datasets to draw conclusions with incredible speed and accuracy. B. The limits of AI in perception and action. The Bootstrap Paradox highlights the areas where AI falls short. Although machines excel in abstract reasoning, they are limited in tasks that require perception, motor skills, and environmental interaction. For example, creating a robot that can successfully navigate a room, pick up objects, and interact with humans is far more difficult than designing a system to beat humans at chess. Human perception is highly sophisticated and adaptive, allowing us to process sensory information from multiple sources, sight, touch, hearing, etc., in real time. However, for AI to replicate human perception, it needs to use a vast array of sensors and complex algorithms to simulate human sensory and motor functions, which often fail in dynamic, unpredictable environments. Autonomous vehicles, for instance, have struggled with navigating complex urban settings, despite excelling in controlled scenarios. Similarly, even the most advanced AI systems struggle with tasks that require a high degree of physical coordination or sensory input, such as playing musical instruments or performing tasks that require subtle adjustments, e.g., threading a needle. These tasks are deeply ingrained in human biology and fine motor skills, which are difficult to program into machines. 3. The paradox in the context of AI development. Why is high-level reasoning easy for AI? The apparent contradiction in Bootstrap's paradox is that tasks requiring high-level reasoning, like playing chess or solving puzzles, are relatively easy for AI, while tasks that seem simple to us, like walking or picking up objects, are extremely difficult. This is because high-level reasoning often involves clear rules and boundaries that can be explicitly programmed into a machine. Tasks such as solving math problems or playing chess follow defined parameters, making them ideal for machine learning algorithms, which thrive on large datasets and precise definitions. In contrast, tasks like motor coordination or perceptual judgments involve unpredictable variables and constant adjustments, which humans perform with ease due to our sensory integration and neural flexibility. These tasks are deeply embodied, requiring the brain to process a variety of inputs simultaneously. For AI to replicate this, it must account for highly complex sensory data and constant environmental changes, which requires advanced algorithms and powerful hardware, factors that remain a significant challenge in robotics and perception-based AI. B. Bridging the gap: AI and human-like cognition. The long-term goal of artificial intelligence research is to create systems that replicate human cognition, not just in reasoning, but in sensing, acting, and interacting with the environment. Bridging the gap between high-level reasoning and embodied intelligence is one of the most profound challenges facing AI developers today. Researchers are now focusing on creating more adaptable, intuitive AI systems that can learn from their environments and improve over time by interacting with the world in a human-like manner. This would involve integrating sensors, robotic arms, visual processing, and AI algorithms to replicate human abilities in areas such as vision, movement, and social interactions. However, this integration of intuitive perception with high-level reasoning remains a frontier of AI research, and achieving true human-like AI will require breakthroughs in neural networks, deep learning, and robotics. 4. Implications for AI and human-machine collaboration. A. Human and AI synergy. Rather than seeing the Bootstrap paradox as a flaw in AI development, it should be viewed as a valuable insight into how humans and AI can complement each other. While machines excel at high-level problem-solving, humans are still the best at tasks that require intuition, embodied intelligence, and perception. As AI technology continues to evolve, the future likely lies in collaboration between human intelligence and machine capabilities. B. Rethinking human abilities. The paradox also forces us to reconsider what we often take for granted. Our seemingly simple abilities, walking, recognizing faces, picking up a glass, are incredibly complex and intuitive. Understanding this complexity will not only inform the development of better AI, but also help us appreciate the remarkable nature of human cognition and biological intelligence. Movement paradox. Imagine you are watching a car speed down a highway. It's clear that the car is in motion, but something doesn't quite add up. You are sitting still, yet you experience the sensation of motion simply by observing it. Or think about a situation where you move your hand through the air. And while your hand moves smoothly, your mind takes a moment to process the action, sometimes causing you to feel a lag, or even a disconnection from your own movement. This is the essence of the movement paradox, a phenomenon where the perception of motion can sometimes contradict reality or the way we experience and process movement. How is it possible for us to perceive motion, yet have a different experience of it, where sometimes motion feels immediate, and at other times, it seems delayed or disconnected? The movement paradox challenges our understanding of how we perceive movement, both externally in the world around us and internally in our own bodies. It raises questions about how our brain processes and interprets motion, and why our senses don't always align with the true nature of motion. Let's explore the movement paradox, where perception, cognition, and reality collide in the fascinating world of motion. The movement paradox is rooted in research from neuroscience, psychology, and cognitive science. Early studies on human perception in the late 19th and early 20th centuries focused on how the brain processes and interprets motion. Researchers began to realize that motion perception is not as straightforward as we once thought. The perception of motion often involves a complex interplay of visual processing, sensory integration, and cognitive evaluation. The movement paradox gained more attention in the mid-20th century with the study of kinesthetic sense, the sense of movement and position of body parts, how the brain integrates this with visual information. One example is apparent motion, a phenomenon where stationary objects appear to move when shown in a sequence of images. This was famously explored by the phi phenomenon in psychology, where moving lights create the illusion of continuous motion. The paradox has since been explored in relation to sensory processing disorders, such as dysphoria and vestibular disorders, where the brain struggles to reconcile motion perception with physical experience. Advances in neuroimaging and computational models have shed light on how the brain constructs our sense of motion by integrating visual cues, auditory inputs, and body movement. Despite all these advances, the movement paradox remains a key area of inquiry, as it underscores how our perception of motion is shaped by both cognitive processes and biological mechanisms that don't always align with the true nature of movement in the world. The movement paradox encompasses several intriguing phenomena in our perception of motion. It arises from the fact that our perception of movement, whether we are moving ourselves or observing external movement, is often subjective and incomplete. While we may feel or observe movement in the world around us, our internal processing of this motion does not always correlate with reality. This paradox highlights the gap between objective motion and how we subjectively experience or perceive it. 1. Perception of external movement. Apparent motion, A. Apparent motion and illusions. The movement paradox is vividly illustrated in the concept of apparent motion, a phenomenon where the mind perceives movement even when an object is stationary. One well-known example is the phi phenomenon, first identified by psychologist Max Wertheimer in 1912. The phi phenomenon occurs when two stationary lights blink on and off in quick succession, and our brains perceive the lights as moving smoothly from one position to the next, even though no actual movement is occurring. This apparent motion is a perceptual illusion, where the brain fills in the gaps between stationary objects to create the experience of continuous motion. The movement paradox arises because, in this case, the mind experiences motion that doesn't exist in the physical world, highlighting the discrepancy between perceived motion and actual movement. B. Motion perception in the real world. While apparent motion is an illusion, real-world motion also poses challenges for our perception. When we observe the movement of objects, such as cars, people, or animals, we rely on the brain's ability to process visual stimuli quickly and efficiently. However, the way we process motion can sometimes result in discrepancies between what we actually see and what we feel. For example, when watching a moving car, the brain often processes the car's movement relative to the background. Peripheral vision plays a key role in this process, but it is not always perfect. If the visual field changes rapidly, or if the car moves against a highly complex or cluttered background, our perception of the speed and direction of motion can be distorted. See latency in motion perception. A significant part of the movement paradox arises from the delay between the actual movement of an object and the brain's perception of that movement. This delay, known as latency, occurs because the brain must process incoming visual data and integrate it with sensory input from the body. This processing delay can lead to a lag between the moment we see an object in motion and the moment we consciously recognize or react to that motion. This lag can cause strange experiences, such as feeling disconnected from our own body's movements. For example, athletes may experience a delay in their perception of movement, where they feel their body is not responding as quickly as they are aware of their surroundings. This experience can be exacerbated by fatigue, stress, or distracting factors in the environment, creating a sense of dissonance between perception and action. 2. Internal movement, the kinesthetic sense. A. Kinesthetic awareness and the role of proprioception. While the perception of external movement is important, the movement paradox also applies to our internal sense of movement. Kinesthetic sense, or proprioception, refers to the body's ability to detect and perceive the position, movement, and orientation of its limbs and joints. This sense allows us to move without constantly looking at our limbs, yet it is not always perfectly synchronized with visual, information, or cognitive processing. Proprioception involves complex signals sent from the muscles, tendons, and joints to the brain, helping us understand our spatial orientation and movement. However, the brain is not always immediately aware of the body's position relative to the environment, especially when the body moves at high speeds or in unfamiliar environments. The movement paradox can arise when there is a disconnect between proprioceptive feedback and our visual perception. For instance, when running or cycling quickly, we may feel that our movements are more deliberate or controlled than they appear to be to others. Conversely, if our muscles are fatigued or if we are distracted, our proprioception may not accurately reflect the degree of movement, leading to a feeling of detachment from the body. B. The delayed perception of movement. An interesting aspect of kinesthetic awareness is the delay between the movement of a body part and the brain's awareness of it. This phenomenon is often more pronounced in activities requiring rapid movements, such as sports or performing arts. When an athlete moves quickly, their brain must process an immense amount of data in real time to maintain coordination and balance. However, due to the processing time, there is often a slight lag between actual movement and perception of that movement, which can make an athlete feel less in control of their actions than they actually are. The movement paradox here is that, even though we can physically perform an action, there is a delay in how our brain processes the motion, leading to a feeling of detachment or disconnection from our own body's movements. This paradox is especially noticeable in high-intensity activities that require rapid adjustments and precise timing. 3. Cognitive and neural processing of motion. A. Motion and the brain's visual processing centers. The brain's visual processing centers, particularly the motion-sensitive areas in the occipital lobe, such as the V5 area, are critical for interpreting motion. The brain relies on these areas to distinguish between moving objects and static backgrounds, and it must process a continuous stream of visual stimuli to generate a coherent experience of motion. However, the brain's ability to perceive motion is influenced by various factors, including the speed and direction of the movement, the background complexity, and the presence of motion cues. This processing is not always perfect, and the movement paradox arises when the brain misinterprets or fails to synchronize motion with the body's physical experience. For instance, motion sickness is a well-known example of how mismatched sensory signals, e.g., visual movement without corresponding physical motion, can lead to confusion in motion perception. B. The role of attention and cognitive load. Another factor contributing to the movement paradox is cognitive load and attention. When we are distracted or cognitively overloaded, the brain may struggle to keep up with the rapid processing required for accurate motion perception. This is why individuals often feel disconnected from their movements or have difficulty tracking fast-moving objects when they are under stress or distracted. In these situations, the brain's ability to maintain awareness of both external and internal movement can become compromised. As a result, we may feel that we are lagging behind in perceiving motion, even if the motion is happening in real time. 4. The intersection of physical and perceptual motion. A. The role of feedback loops in motion. The movement paradox underscores the idea that motion perception involves a continuous feedback loop between visual input, proprioception, and cognitive processing. The brain constantly updates its understanding of movement based on sensory feedback. However, this loop is not always perfectly synchronized, leading to slight misalignments between what we experience and what is actually happening in the physical world. For example, a person may be walking quickly but perceive themselves as moving more slowly due to a temporary disconnect between visual and proprioceptive signals. This feedback mismatch can lead to dizziness or disorientation when the brain struggles to integrate conflicting sensory data. B. The importance of sensory integration. The movement paradox also emphasizes the importance of sensory integration, where the brain combines visual, auditory, and kinesthetic signals to create a unified perception of movement. When one of these sensory inputs is compromised, such as in the case of vestibular disorders, affecting balance and spatial orientation, the perception of motion can become distorted, leading to feelings of motion sickness or disorientation. 5. Conclusion. The complexity of movement perception. The movement paradox illustrates the complexity of how we perceive and process motion in the world around us and within our own bodies. From apparent motion and kinesthetic awareness to cognitive delays and sensory integration, motion is not always as straightforward as it seems. Despite our bodies moving seamlessly, our minds can experience delays, misalignments, and distortions in how we process motion, leading to the paradox of disconnection and perceptual lag. Understanding this paradox offers insights into how we experience the world and how motion, one of the most fundamental aspects of human experience, can sometimes defy our expectations. It also highlights the intricate relationship between physical movement and mental processing, as well as the vulnerabilities of our senses and cognitive systems.